Hello, my name's Felicity. I earned my wings, then my sister shredded them, the night before my very first flight, and she didn't do it quietly. She did it knowing the captain would walk in. She did it knowing no one would stop her. She even smiled when I froze, holding the pieces of my dream in my hands like trash. They said it was a misunderstanding, that maybe I overreacted, that maybe I wasn't emotionally stable enough to fly. But what if the lie wasn't that I was unstable? What if the truth was that they'd always planned to keep me grounded? What kind of family does that? What kind of sister smiles while clipping your wings? The overhead lights in the locker room were brutal, fluorescent, sterile, exposing every crease on my face and every wrinkle in my nerves. My hands were still cold from the autumn air outside, and I could hear my own footsteps echo as I stepped inside, trying to steady my breath. This was it. My first real day as a commercial airline pilot. I had rehearsed everything the night before. The walk, the smile, even the casual way I'd nod to the crew like I'd done it all before. My badge, freshly printed, still smelled like warm plastic. I clutched it in one hand, and in the other, a sealed plastic garment bag. Inside, the navy blue uniform I'd dreamed of wearing since I was a kid, sitting in the back of Dad's car, watching planes disappear into the clouds. I reached my assigned locker, fourth row, far end. Quiet, tucked away. I wanted it that way. Less attention, less noise. But the second I opened the locker door, everything fell apart. Literally. The uniform inside, my uniform, had been shredded. Not torn accidentally. No. This was intentional. Deliberate. Strips of fabric. Buttons snapped off. Threads dangling like nerve endings. The skirt was in pieces. The blazer slashed through the emblem. The wings were gone. All of it. I froze. My stomach dropped to the soles of my shoes. Then I heard it. The sound of her chewing gum, that slow, rhythmic pop she'd done since high school when she was about to say something nasty. "You're up early," came a voice from the bench behind me. Calm. Calculated. I turned slowly. And there she was. Isolde. My sister. Her dark hair was tied back in that too-tight bun that made her look like she never blinked. She was leaning against the wall like she'd been waiting for this moment. For me. Her phone in hand, legs crossed, like it was just another Tuesday. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She gestured toward the uniform scraps. "Oops," she said, mock casual. "Must have gotten lost in the wash." "Isolde," I whispered, because yelling felt useless. "Why would you—" "You're not flying today, Felicity," she interrupted, her tone flat. "You're not flying above me. Not today. Not ever, if I can help it." My fingers clutched the edge of the locker door. I could barely breathe, and I hated myself for letting her see how shaken I was. She stood, stepped closer. I didn't flinch, but my heart was hammering. She looked me up and down, her lips curling. "You think this place is ready for you? For your emotional breakdowns and little panic attacks? I've been holding this place together for 6 years, and now you waltz in with your straight-A certificates and your fresh-pressed dreams?" She stepped past me, slowly, brushing her shoulder against mine. "There's only one Sorrel this place respects, and I already made sure you wouldn't be the second." My mind was a blank page, white noise, rage, fear, humiliation. I bent down to gather the remains of the uniform, though I didn't know why. Maybe I thought if I pieced it together, I could still make it work. That's when the door opened again. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Captain Ellery. I'd met him once during orientation. He'd been short, almost brusque, but his reputation was ironclad. Former Navy, no nonsense, and my direct captain for today's flight. He stepped in, halted, saw the fabric in my hands, saw my sister standing smugly, and saw the absolute panic plastered all over my face. He said nothing, not one word. His gaze landed on Isolde, then flicked to me. His jaw moved like he was grinding something down. Then, without even blinking, he muttered, "Briefing in 30 minutes," and turned on his heel. The door clicked behind him, and with it, any sense of support I'd hoped for. I dropped onto the bench, numb. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead, I just sat there, clutching the shredded blazer like it was a life vest. This was my first day, my dream job, and the only person who could have had my back had just walked away. My badge had fallen at my feet. I reached for it, my hand trembling. As I picked it up, the screen lit up. A notification blinked. Flight crew reassignment. You've been moved to ground support. Please report to HR. My mouth went dry. That was it. No explanation, no warning. Just gone. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to tell me this was a mistake, a technical glitch, anything. But nothing changed, and neither did the sinking feeling in my chest. Was that my only chance? I whispered, not to anyone, just to the air, the flickering lights, the walls that had already heard too much. I stood up slowly, legs weak beneath me. The pieces of my uniform were still on the floor. I didn't pick them up. I just left. The badge was still in my hand when the notification lit up. Not a call, not even a message from a human being, just a sterile, automated prompt blinking back at me like a closed door. Your role has been reassigned. I didn't move at first. My mind tried to rationalize it. Technical glitch? Maybe HR moved things around. But even before I opened the crew app on my tablet, my gut had already started bracing for the blow. Effective immediately. Reassignment to ground operations support. That was the exact line. No greeting. No explanation. Just a plain, faceless sentence that carried more weight than anything my sister could have screamed. I stood there in the locker room for a while. The pieces of my shredded uniform were still on the floor behind me. The air felt thicker than it had 5 minutes ago. I couldn't even tell if it was humiliation, anger, or disbelief pulsing through me, but I knew I couldn't stay there, not with her smirking in the background, not with every second reminding me that I was no longer flying. I stepped out of the locker room and headed down the corridor toward the operations desk. My shoes felt too loud against the linoleum. The hallway wasn't busy yet, but a few staff passed by. Each glance either avoided mine or skimmed over me like I didn't exist. That's the thing about airports. Everyone's rushing to somewhere, but you feel it when you've just been left behind. The man behind the ops desk, Steve, a middle manager I'd only spoken to once during orientation, was scrolling through his screen. When I approached, he glanced up, already uncomfortable. I got a reassignment notice, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Steve shifted, then looked back at the monitor. Right, yeah, you've been marked as emotionally unfit to fly. HR will follow up with you today. Emotionally unfit? I repeated, not even bothering to hide the disbelief. Based on what? He didn't look at me. He didn't even pretend to check the file. You'd have to take that up with HR. I'm just showing you what I was told. You know this is going on my permanent file, right? My voice was quieter now, but sharper. That's the kind of flag that ends careers. He finally met my eyes. I'm not the one who made that call. I stepped back, throat burning. Of course he wasn't. People like Steve never make the call. They just pass it along, like bad weather reports. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. Instead of heading to HR, I found a corner in the hallway where no one was around, just a folding chair next to a storage closet where I sat down and tried to catch my breath. The hall buzzed faintly with distant intercom calls and the hum of vending machines, but inside me, it was deafening silence. Emotionally unfit. That phrase rang in my ears like a cheap insult dressed up in clinical language. I hadn't panicked. I hadn't faltered. I'd walked into the locker room like any other pilot, only to find my career torn up by someone who shared my last name. And that phrase, it wasn't random. She gets anxious when things don't go perfect. I remembered those exact words coming out of Isolda's mouth years ago during a family dinner when I'd excused myself after a panic attack in college. She'd said it like a joke, like she was doing damage control before I could explain anything for myself. My parents had chuckled politely, then changed the subject. That was always her style, cutting you down under the pretense of care. Now, it was in a file. I opened the HR portal on my tablet, and something told me to check the synced drives. Years ago, Isolda had connected her old iPad to our shared cloud to help manage travel plans for our mom. She probably forgot. I hadn't. And there it was, a draft email from Isolde to HR, never sent, just sitting in her drive. I'm concerned for my sister's readiness. She's had breakdowns before. I wouldn't want her mental state to jeopardize passenger safety. My fingers went numb. I read it again, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. There was no concern in those lines. It wasn't protective. It was calculated. She hadn't sabotaged me in a fit of jealousy. She'd planned this. She'd written this before I ever stepped into the building. This wasn't about being the better sister or the smarter employee. This was about control, keeping me small, grounded. I stared at the wall across from me, white, cracked in one corner, a maintenance sticker curling off the light switch. Suddenly, it felt like I was back in our childhood bathroom, 10 years old, sitting on the floor after Isolde locked me out of our room. Back then, it had just been a prank. Now, it was career assassination wrapped in company policy. I didn't cry. I didn't feel like she deserved that satisfaction. What I felt was something deeper, a kind of silent collapse, not just in confidence, but in trust. I pulled out my phone and tapped the only contact who might actually listen, Lyora Vance, veteran flight attendant. She'd trained me back during my internship days. The kind of woman who didn't smile unless she meant it, and who never entertained drama, but always knew when something wasn't right. I typed the message, "Can you talk?" My thumb hovered over the send button for a second, then I tapped it. No punctuation, no explanation, just 3 words, because somehow I knew she'd already heard the rumors, and maybe, just maybe, she knew something more. The rain had softened to a mist, hanging in the air just enough to blur the outline of the planes on the runway. I stood outside the terminal, my coat barely shielding me from the damp chill settling in my collar. My thumb hovered over the phone screen. The message had been sent. "Can you talk?" And now I waited. No response yet. Each second felt heavy, suspended between what I knew and what I wasn't ready to admit out loud. Through the window beside me, I watched a departure board flip slowly. Flight numbers came and went, except mine. My name wasn't on any of those rosters anymore. I didn't belong to any gate, any team, any sky. I was erased. The ache settled in deeper as my eyes followed a plane taxiing to the runway. I'd dreamt of this moment for years, but it wasn't supposed to look like this. Not standing in the rain, not watching others live the version of life I'd worked for, while I stayed grounded, pun intended. Waiting didn't help, so I walked. Past the security doors, through the staff exit, toward the quieter backlot near the crew parking area. The city was still waking up. Everything was gray, sky, asphalt, even the morning radio chatter echoing from an open maintenance truck window. The world didn't stop just because my heart had come. A familiar smell passed by. Wet concrete and old pine needles. It reminded me of home. Of that one night 2 weeks ago, just before all this spiraled. I'd come home for dinner. A celebration, Mom had called it, even though I knew better. The flashback didn't need permission, it just came. The dining room had been set perfectly, like always. Isolde's favorite casserole. That strange wine Dad used to like, though it always tasted like metal to me. Mom lit candles, even though we weren't expecting company. Everything felt rehearsed, like a play I'd walked into too late to change the script. Isolde had shown up late, but swept in like she owned the room. Hugged Mom like she hadn't seen her in years, even though they lived in the same house. She didn't even glance at me before dropping her keys on the table and sliding into the head chair, Dad's old spot. Conversation flowed. About her department's new safety protocol, the young recruits she had to manage, the email she got from upper management, just praising her consistency. And me? I was barely a blip. My name came up once, when Mom mentioned I had finished simulator training. "Oh yeah," Isolde said between bites, not looking up. "I helped her prep for that. She panicked before the first flight sim, remember? But she's getting there." Getting there, like I was some charity case, like the hours I poured into every checklist, every code, every pre-flight analysis were hers to reference. I remember pushing food around on my plate, forcing a smile. No one asked how I was feeling. No one asked about my schedule. I might as well have been the cousin they invited out of pity. Even then, I knew. This wasn't new. It had always been like this. Isolde was the benchmark, the star, the trusted one. I was the resilient sister, the one who bounced back, not the one who led. Even when I earned something, it got reframed, twisted into a narrative where Isolde had played some guiding role. Her success was individual, mine, always somehow collective, always thanks to. The rain picked up again, snapping me out of it. I reached for my phone to check the time, and that's when I saw the email alert. Document accessed, scholarship archive folder. My pulse quickened. Years ago, I'd set up a trigger on my email to notify me if anyone opened that folder. A folder that contained all my early applications, scholarships, internships, letters of recommendation. It was buried deep in my cloud drive, long forgotten. I clicked through, and there it was, a file labeled Flight Ed Scholar 2009 PDF. I opened it. It was a grant acceptance letter from a National Aviation Association. Addressed to me, Felicity Sorrell. Full tuition coverage for advanced flight school, pending verification of identity and acceptance. The timestamp was from over a decade ago, but the download history showed it had been accessed and rerouted. The original email had been forwarded to Isolde's inbox. On the same day, I received a generic rejection notice. I closed my eyes, jaw locked. She didn't just take the spotlight, she stole the engine. She had accepted that scholarship in my name. Used it to transfer her own certification to commercial, then told everyone she'd done it on her own, and I'd believed I just hadn't been good enough. I let out a slow breath, steadying my thoughts. The pieces were lining up now. This wasn't just sibling rivalry, this was systemic erasure. I sat down on the curb, near the crew lot, my jacket soaking through. My legs ached, but I didn't care. I needed to feel the cold, needed to anchor myself. I've been climbing out of holes she's dug since I was 17, I muttered. I thought about the extra classes I worked overtime to afford, the part-time jobs I picked up while studying, the way I'd bite my tongue every time someone praised my resilience without realizing it came from crawling through sabotage. This wasn't just a professional betrayal, it was historical, structural, etched into every family photo where she stood in the center and I stood off to the side. But now, I wasn't backing away. I wasn't the backup plan. I was the version of me she feared would outgrow her. My phone buzzed again. A new message. Meet me in the hangar lot. I have something you need to hear. Lyora. I made my way to the hangar lot slowly, hands deep in my coat pockets, every step measured. The lot sat behind the maintenance bay, just far enough from the main terminal to feel like its own world. Quiet, industrial, overlooked. The air was cooler now, the kind of chill that settled into your sleeves and made you aware of how tired your body really was. Lyora was already there. She leaned against her car, arms crossed, her stance firm but familiar. The light from the single overhead fixture bathed her in a tired orange glow. It flickered once, just once, then stayed steady, as if it too understood that tonight wasn't the time for theatrics. I approached, and she didn't say hello. She just looked at me. The way someone does when they've already decided to be on your side, whether or not you're ready to fight. You look like hell, she said simply. I huffed out something between a laugh and an exhale. You should see the other guy. Lyora raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth twitching. She reached into the inside pocket of her windbreaker and pulled out a folded slip of paper. No names, just a printout. I took it. The words weren't long. A short message, sent from an internal alias. Keep her grounded. You know what she's capable of. I read it 3 times, then I looked back up. This went out the night before your reassignment, she said, to several senior staff, not just HR, ops, scheduling, even one of the pilots on your flight roster. I didn't speak. My fingers tightened around the page. It doesn't say your name, she continued, but anyone who's worked here more than 5 minutes knows who it's about. I handed the paper back, though I wanted to crumple it. Is this why no one looked me in the eye yesterday? I asked. It's why they pulled you off that flight without even letting you plead your case. Her voice had that edge now, the one she usually saved for gate agents who thought she was just a flight attendant. This is gaslighting, I said quietly. Professional, coordinated, It's not just sabotage, it's a smear campaign. Leora opened her car door without a word, reached into the glove box, and pulled out a USB stick. She didn't hand it to me right away. She looked at it, then looked at me. I wasn't going to get involved, she said. You know how it works here. You step into the fire, you're gonna get scorched. But then I heard this. She placed it in my hand. I hesitated. What is it? She answered simply. Proof. Back at my place, I plugged it into my laptop. The recording was low quality, faint humming from the break room refrigerator in the background, someone clicking a pen. And then, her voice, clear, sharp, unmistakable. If she gets on that flight, I'm done here. I'll go public with everything. She panics. She overthinks. She's not safe. I won't let her fly. Isolde, my sister. She was talking to someone she clearly trusted. And she wasn't whispering. She was making a case. A calculated one. I covered for her during simulator phase. I told HR she was just nervous. But if she flies solo and something goes wrong, it's on me. And I'm not putting my job on the line for that. There was a pause. A sip of something. Coffee, maybe. You think she's ready? Look, this industry doesn't reward good hearts. It rewards stability, and Felicity has never been stable. I clicked pause. My hands were stone. That was all I needed to hear. And yet I sat there, staring at the screen, breath shallow, chest aching, like I'd run 10 flights of stairs. It wasn't just unkind. It was dangerous. If she'd said it to HR directly, it would have been hearsay, but said in the break room, with enough detail to poison the well, she wanted me out. Not because I was a risk, but because I was competition. She'd created a narrative where I couldn't be trusted with passengers, so she could keep her reputation spotless. And the thing was, she almost succeeded. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The anger was too sharp, too clean. It carved out space inside me for something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about ethics, about safety, about the truth. The next morning, I met with HR. I didn't tell them about the recording, not yet. Instead, I asked questions, pointed ones. I watched how they deflected, how their language shifted from concerns to recommendations to temporary reassignments. I saw the dance. I saw the silence behind every shrug. That night, I called Leora. I'm not going public, I said. A pause. Okay, she said slowly. Then what? I'm going internal, I told her. Internal ethics, flight board, union rep, quietly, professionally. I'll take this to every channel that requires a signature and a receipt. Leora exhaled through the line, a low breath of approval. That's the kind of quiet that makes noise. I'm not out to destroy her, I added, but I'm not letting her destroy me either. There was another pause. Then her voice softened. You sound like a damn pilot. I didn't respond, but my fingers touched the edge of the USB again, still plugged into my laptop. The next day, I submitted the recording, the anonymous message, and a full written statement to the Internal Review Committee, names, dates, documentation. Nothing emotional, just the facts. It felt clinical, cold, but also right. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. My phone buzzed. One unread message. Meeting request. Internal Review Committee, 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. I barely slept. The hours between that meeting request and the morning alarm were a blur of half-brewed coffee and sentences I rehearsed over and over in my head. But nothing sounded right at 3:00 a.m. Everything felt either too angry or too fragile. I didn't want to show up emotional. I wanted to show up prepared. By the time the sun cracked through the blinds, I'd already showered, dressed, and slipped into a uniform that wasn't mine. It was a borrowed set from HR, one size too tight and clearly not made for someone who'd been trained for this. Still, it had my name tag clipped over the breast pocket, and that alone gave me just enough grounding. Walking through SeaTac that morning felt different. There was something quieter than usual in the air. Maybe it was just my perception, Or maybe it was the fact that everyone seemed to know what I didn't, that I'd been dragged through a storm nobody warned me about. I reached the committee room 10 minutes early. HR sat on one side, legal had a seat on the other. Across from them was the union representative and a senior captain I didn't recognize, probably brought in for neutrality. The table in front of me felt too wide, too polished, and far too impersonal for what I was about to unfold. Ms. Sorrell, the committee lead began, without even glancing up. We're here to clarify recent reassignments and to discuss concerns raised regarding your fitness to fly. I nodded once. I'm aware. One of the HR reps adjusted her glasses. Please understand, this is not disciplinary. We're simply addressing feedback that suggests potential instability under high-pressure scenarios. That word again. Instability. I didn't react to it this time. Instead, I pulled the folder from my bag, placed it on the table, and slid it forward. I'm aware of the phrasing used. I've seen the messages, heard the recordings. But more than that, I've lived under the weight of that narrative for most of my adult life. They exchanged looks. I continued. That's a collection of evidence. Preferential assignment records from last year. Recommendations that were supposedly written by me but matched my sister's phrasing exactly. And an anonymous HR complaint filed 3 months ago, detailing nepotism and manipulation within the ops team. I watched as one of the committee members flipped through the first few pages, her eyes narrowing slightly. My voice didn't tremble. I was past that point. This didn't start last week. It didn't begin with one rumor or one mistake. This is part of a larger pattern, one I've stayed silent about for too long, but silence, apparently, is interpreted as weakness in this place. I let that hang in the air. For years, I've been the one who adapted, who deferred, who never made noise. I'm not doing that anymore. The room was still. Not cold, not aggressive, just still. For the first time since this started, I felt like they were actually hearing me. The meeting adjourned without fanfare. No applause, no verdict, just nods, a promise to follow up, and a quiet ushering out of the room. But I didn't feel defeated walking out. I felt like I had finally shoved the door open, just wide enough for the truth to slip through. Later that afternoon, I was scheduled to attend a crew orientation meeting, mandatory for all flight staff returning from reassignment. I didn't expect Isolde to be there. But when I walked into the room, she was seated near the back, legs crossed, arms folded, wearing a look of calm control, like she'd just stepped out of a magazine cover on How to Command a Room Without Speaking. I didn't acknowledge her. I found a seat near the front and took out a pen, mostly to have something to hold. The session started normally. Procedures, updates, revised safety protocols. The facilitator, a man I'd met only briefly, was running through the slides with the kind of speed you use when you're trying to finish before lunch. And then, right in the middle of it, Isolde cleared her throat. Just a reminder, she said smoothly, not everyone who wears the uniform is emotionally qualified to fly. Some of us have had to intervene in the past to protect this crew, whether or not that was ever made official. She didn't look at me, but she didn't need to. The room froze. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, like she was being noble, like she was the gatekeeper of professionalism. I stood, not in a dramatic way, just slowly, evenly. I turned toward the front of the room and addressed the group, not her. I passed my psychological evaluation, I said. I passed every technical exam, simulator run, and mid-air test under FAA regulation. What I failed at was believing that my own blood wouldn't try to sabotage me out of insecurity. A few heads turned sharply. If anyone here has concerns about my readiness to fly, I continued, you can file a formal complaint. I'll welcome it, but I will not stand here and allow whispered slander to shape the story of my career, not from strangers, and certainly not from someone who should have been proud of me instead of threatened by me. Silence. Then a voice somewhere in the back. She's right. Then another. Yeah, enough of this passive-aggressive crap. The facilitator looked stunned. He adjusted his tie. Okay, let's stay professional, folks. Isolde stood up, clearly preparing to defend herself, but the mood had shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. She knew it. And so did I. The session ended shortly after, and I packed up my things quietly. As I was walking toward the door, Captain Ellery, who had sat silently through the entire exchange, stepped into my path. He looked at me for a long moment, then leaned in slightly. "You just gave them something to remember," he said. "Now give me something to trust." His voice still echoed in my mind as I stood in front of the plane the next morning, soft but deliberate. "Now give me something to trust." That wasn't just a challenge, it was a promise, and I intended to deliver. The chill from the early hours hadn't lifted yet, but I was already sweating beneath my uniform. Not from nerves, at least not entirely, but from the intensity of everything I had fought through to get here. I adjusted my cap, checked my flight roster once more, and made my way across the tarmac toward Gate 17. Everything felt sharper, the steps of ground crew, the fuel truck pulling away, the murmur of radio chatter in my ear. The moment I stepped onto the aircraft, something shifted in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't being questioned. I was being trusted, assigned, expected. The lead flight attendant offered a quick nod, barely glancing up from her checklist. No forced smiles, no pity in her eyes, just professionalism. It was the kindest gesture I'd received in days. I placed my flight bag behind the co-pilot seat and started my pre-check without needing to remind myself of a single step. Every system, every dial, every checklist line. My body knew what to do, even if my heart still limped a little behind. Halfway through, I tapped open the crew manifest on my tablet. Seat 4A. Elaine Marin. I froze. Mom. The screen blurred slightly before I realized I'd stopped blinking. I hadn't heard from her in days. Not since Isolde's mess started making its way through the system. I'd sent her 3 messages. Short ones, no guilt trips, just updates. She hadn't replied to a single one. I stared at her name. The plane wasn't even half full yet, but she was already boarded, tucked somewhere in the cabin, seatbelt fastened, probably thumbing through the emergency card like she'd never seen one before. My fingers hovered over the intercom, unsure what I would even say. Instead, I inhaled, turned off the screen, and kept working. I couldn't afford to crumble, not here, not now. By the time we were rolling onto the runway, I'd pushed her to the back of my mind, locking that emotional weight away like a carry-on in an overhead bin I didn't plan to open. Captain Ellery gave me a glance during takeoff, the kind that didn't need words. I nodded. We accelerated, climbed, cut through a sky that opened up just enough to feel like the world was giving me space again. At 13,000 feet, he slid the control column toward me. "Your bird," he said. I didn't hesitate. "My bird," I replied. I adjusted pitch, leveled, and guided us through a mild wind shift without flinching. The clouds outside shimmered like broken glass, but my hands were steady. When the turbulence came, I let it pass through the frame without overcorrecting, just rode the rhythm until it settled. And it did, because I could fly. Because she hadn't taken that from me. Touchdown was smooth, controlled. The moment the wheels kissed the runway, I felt something unspoken settle deep inside me. Closure, maybe, or just something like it. Once the cabin cleared and the last of the passengers filtered into the terminal, I stayed in the cockpit a moment longer, wiping down the controls, letting the hum of the engines winding down lull me into silence. That's when I heard soft footsteps. I turned slightly. There she was. My mother stood just outside the flight deck, her purse clutched in front of her like it was armor. Her eyes were glassy, but she wasn't crying. "You didn't just land a plane today," she said, her voice low, careful. "You landed yourself." I opened my mouth, but she raised a hand gently. I was wrong to doubt that, wrong to believe. Everything I heard. That's all she said, and it was enough. I nodded once, not because I forgave her entirely, not yet, but because I saw something in her face that told me she was trying, and trying mattered. I gathered my bag and stepped off the plane. In the hallway near the crew lounge, I was pulling out my badge when I saw Leora waiting near the lockers. She wasn't dressed for a flight. Civilian clothes, denim jacket, low bun. Her hands were in her pockets. "I figured you'd still be up here," she said. "Didn't expect to see you," I replied. She handed me a file. "Another one came in," she said, "from someone in scheduling, An audio file. I raised my eyebrows but didn't speak. She was bragging about it, Leora continued. Told someone over coffee that she had HR in her pocket. Said no one would touch her because she's a sorrel and no one's going to believe Felicity over me. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. They're starting to come forward, Leora added, quietly. But it's beginning. I tucked the file into my bag. Then I won't back down, I said. The words were quiet, but they landed. Leora studied me for a beat longer. You're not the same woman I trained, she said, almost thoughtfully. You're better. We didn't hug. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. Back in my car, I let the engine idle before checking my phone. A new notification blinked at the top of the screen. Internal Review Summary. Findings delivered tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. The moment I saw that calendar notification, everything inside me slowed down. Not in fear, but in a kind of focused anticipation. I didn't need a reminder for the meeting. That time was already carved into my bones. I spent the evening organizing my papers one last time. I laid everything out on the kitchen table, photocopies of internal memos, screenshots of text chains, the printout of that anonymous message, and Leora's recording now officially notarized and included as an exhibit in my submission to the ethics board. I wasn't jittery like before. I didn't rehearse what to say in front of the mirror. I didn't call Leora for reassurance. I didn't need to. My case wasn't built on emotions or personal vendettas. It was built on facts, dates, patterns. The truth, plain and simple. I slept for 5 solid hours, which might not sound like much, but it was more than I'd had in weeks. And when I woke up, the sky outside was pink and gray. Seattle's odd little way of saying, today might go either way. I brewed 1 cup of black coffee and drank it slowly while the house stayed quiet. Then I got dressed. Same uniform, clean pressed, not borrowed this time, mine. I pinned the wings over my left pocket and stared at myself for just long enough to see that I was standing straighter now. Shoulders back, chin up, no shaking hands. When I arrived at the building, there were already reporters outside. Not many. Just 2 small crews and a freelance photographer hanging around the sidewalk, pretending not to be waiting. But I knew what they were there for. Word spreads fast when someone in uniform accuses someone higher up of corruption. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked straight through the revolving doors, past reception, and up the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. My legs needed to move. My heart needed the rhythm. The review room was colder than the others I'd been in. 4 people sat across the table, 2 from HR, 1 from the Aviation Ethics Board, and 1 external legal observer. Everyone had a folder. The stack in front of them was thicker than the one I'd submitted. Mrs. Sorrel, the lead reviewer said, nodding. Thank you for coming. We've reviewed your documentation and cross-referenced it with internal communications and personnel files. He didn't ask if I had anything more to say. He didn't ask for opening remarks. This wasn't a hearing. This was a decision. We've determined, he continued, that Ms. Isolde Marin has engaged in willful manipulation of reporting structures, undue influence over internal staffing assignments, and reputational sabotage through unofficial channels. I didn't blink. She knowingly interfered with flight team selection processes and submitted verbally and in writing false information regarding your psychological fitness to fly. No dramatics, no legalese, just the facts, 1 sentence at a time. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't smile. But my shoulders, God, they finally dropped an inch. Not in defeat, in relief. The lead HR representative took over. As of today, Ms. Marin is suspended from her position for 6 months, without pay. She will be required to complete a mandatory psychological and leadership conduct assessment. Additionally, she must submit a written acknowledgement of her actions to both the HR department and the flight union. A pause. If she attempts to contact you or breach the no-contact order, she will be permanently blacklisted from any flight or supervisory role within the region. That was it. The room stayed quiet for a beat, and then they dismissed me. I walked out the same way I walked in, straight-backed. Quiet, composed. The moment I stepped outside, the flashes started. Felicity, do you have a comment? Is this about retaliation? Did your sister know you were recording her? I didn't say a word. I kept walking, past the microphones, past the headlines I could already see forming. Pilot files formal ethics complaint against sister. Internal aviation shakeup. Family feud at 30,000 feet. Let them write what they wanted. I didn't need their words. I had mine. Back in my car, I closed the door and finally exhaled. The sound surprised me, longer and deeper than I expected. I rested my head against the steering wheel just for a second. I hadn't realized how heavy everything had been until someone else took part of the weight off. Later that night, I was folding laundry when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer anyway. Felicity? My mother. I sat down on the edge of my bed, holding the phone a little tighter than I meant to. I didn't raise you to fight like this, she said. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was tired. I paused for a second, then said quietly, No, Mom, you didn't. But I raised myself to survive it. There was a silence, a long one. Then she whispered, Maybe I should have seen more. I'm not asking you to choose between us, I said. I'm asking you to stop pretending we're the same. Another silence. And then she ended the call without a goodbye. And somehow, I didn't feel guilty. I stood, turned off the light, and let the room stay dark for a moment. That's when my phone lit up again. One new message from the airline's media team. Subject: Feature nomination. Captain Ellery. Text: Captain Ellery has nominated you for a pilot spotlight piece on leadership under adversity. Would you be willing to share your story? I read the text twice, not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because something in me still couldn't believe it was real. A feature story, public. On record, they wanted me to speak, not as a cautionary tale, not buried in some internal policy update, but as a symbol of resilience, a pilot who had been grounded and got back up. I stared at the message, thumbs still, until the screen dimmed and went dark. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a walk. The sun was just starting to fade behind the hangars, casting that soft golden wash over the tarmac. I circled the perimeter once, my steps slow, my thoughts racing. I wasn't scared of talking. God knows I'd been forced to speak up in rooms where my voice barely counted. But going public? That was different. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what my story represented. About how many people, especially women, had been quietly shoved aside in this field, told they were too emotional, too green, too sensitive for the cockpit. And here I was, still standing, still flying. When I got back to the terminal, I responded with a simple word. Yes. The next morning, I sat in a small media room tucked behind the airline's HR office. It wasn't glamorous. Plain white walls, 2 softbox lights, a single camera set on a tripod. They had a makeup artist on standby, but I politely declined. I didn't want them to dress me up. I didn't want to look like a PR version of myself. I was there to tell the truth, not perform it. The interviewer, a woman in her mid-40s with steady eyes and a warm presence, smiled at me. Thank you for doing this, she said. I nodded. Thank you for asking. We settled into our seats, and after a quick mic check, the camera rolled. She didn't ease in with pleasantries. She went straight for it. What made you stay after everything? I let the silence hang for a second. I wasn't in a rush. Then I said, Because flying is mine. It always was. And no one, not even family, gets to take that from me. She leaned forward. Was there a moment you thought about quitting? I smiled faintly. Every minute for a while, when your uniform's cut to pieces, when your name's dragged through committee meetings, and the people you love most question your stability, it gets tempting to believe them. A pause. But I didn't stop flying because someone cut my wings. I built new ones, stronger, quieter, mine. She didn't say anything, just nodded, the kind of nod that means something landed. Later that week, Captain Ellery's retirement ceremony was announced. An email was sent across the company, formal invitation, dress code, reception to follow. I wasn't sure I'd be asked to speak, but the day before the event, an assistant from the office stopped by my crew locker. "He requested you," she said. "He wants you to say something. You were his last co-pilot." The evening of the ceremony, the hangar was transformed. Rows of folding chairs, banners with years of service printed across fabric, and a podium set up in front of a backdrop that read, "Thank you, Captain Ellery." There were pilots, technicians, trainees, regional execs, all gathered in quiet appreciation of a man who'd flown longer than some of them had been alive. I stood near the back, not planning to speak first. But when they called me up, the room hushed. I walked slowly to the mic, my heels clicking softly across the concrete floor. And there, in the third row, sat my mother. I hadn't invited her. I didn't even know she'd come. But she was there, hands clasped in her lap, watching. I turned to the mic and exhaled. "They said my file would be closed," I began. "That I wouldn't fly again. That one bad moment meant I wasn't fit to hold the controls." I paused. "But the sky isn't a door you can lock. It's a decision you make to rise, every day. Not because it's easy, but because it's yours." No applause yet, just stillness. And Captain Ellery. He reminded me that you don't have to be loud to lead. Sometimes the quietest moments are where character shows up. And for that, I'm grateful. Then the clapping started. Not wild, not loud, but steady, solid. Even my mother stood. Afterward, I stepped outside for air. The night had settled deep, stars faint behind the clouds, the air cool on my face. Ellery joined me, hands in his pockets, the same relaxed posture he carried in every cockpit. "You did good," he said. I nodded. "Thank you. For everything." He looked at me, eyes softer than I'd seen them before. "It wasn't your uniform that made you a pilot," he said. "It was how you landed when you had nothing on." That line stayed with me long after he walked away. I drove home in silence. No radio, just headlights and reflection. When I reached the front door, there was an envelope waiting. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. I brought it inside, peeled it open slowly. A single note. "To Felicity. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I remember everything. Isolde." I didn't open the letter right away. I held it in my hands, letting my fingers trace the handwriting that somehow still felt familiar, even after all the distance we'd placed between us. There was no return address, no embellishments, just my name, just her words inside. I knew that before I ever unfolded the paper. The house was quiet. It always was on my days off. No ringing phones, no cockpit alerts, no static voices calling out cross-check complete. Just the sound of the wind shifting through the neighborhood trees and the creak of my porch chair as I sat down, envelope in hand. I finally tore it open with a steady hand and unfolded the note. "You earned what I tried to steal, and I'm sorry it took me this long to admit it." That was it. No long-winded apologies, no excuses, no begging, just acknowledgement. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. I didn't cry. But my chest did something. Tightened, maybe. Not in pain, but in a kind of release. Like something that had been locked up for too long had finally breathed. The autumn wind picked up, bringing with it the familiar scent of wet cedar and the coming rain. Seattle rarely gives you sun when you need it, but it always gives you time to think. I sat there a while longer before going inside, placing the letter, not in the trash, not in a drawer, but in the back of my journal. Tucked between pages filled with coffee stains, old log entries, and thoughts I'd never let myself say aloud. I turned to a fresh page and wrote one simple line. "I may never get the sister I deserved, but I became the woman she feared I'd become. And that's enough." I closed the book, placed it back on the shelf, and moved on with my day. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, zipping up my uniform. It was clean, crisp. The navy blue fabric lay smooth across my shoulders, the sleeves resting neatly at my wrists. But it wasn't the uniform that gave me pause. It was the badge, not the plastic ID clipped to my chest, but the small silver wings above it. a symbol. To others, it was just regulation, part of the uniform, like the shoes or the stripes on my sleeve. But to me, it was the one thing no one had been able to take, not even when they tried to rip it from me piece by piece. Those wings weren't handed to me out of pity or legacy. I had earned them. Through resistance, through grief, through every moment I stood alone when I should have been defended. I touched the badge lightly, just a brush of my fingers across the metal, and then turned to grab my travel case. The drive to the airport was uneventful. Overcast skies, light drizzle, a perfect Seattle cliché. But the kind that made you appreciate every clear landing you ever got. Inside the terminal, everything looked the same as always. Clean floors, voices bouncing off high ceilings, the scent of airport coffee too weak to wake anyone. I waved at the gate agents I knew, nodded to a few maintenance techs, and made my way toward the crew check-in. My next assignment was a Tokyo-Seattle international return, a long haul, complex coordination. But I was ready. At the gate, I reviewed the passenger manifest, the weight distribution charts, and the weather patterns for both departure and arrival, all routine, all standard. Then came the knock on the cockpit door. I turned, expecting the captain, but instead it was the new junior pilot assigned to ride second seat for this leg. He looked young, not by age necessarily, but by posture, nervous, eyes scanning everything like he wasn't sure he belonged in the space he'd been assigned. I recognized that look. I'd worn it once. He stepped in, cleared his throat, and gave a hesitant nod. "I'm Michael. First international assignment," he said. I smiled, gestured to the co-pilot seat. "I've been where you are," I told him. "Don't let anyone talk you out of the sky." He blinked, like he hadn't expected that kind of welcome, then sat, a little taller than before. As we prepared for takeoff, I went through the checklists with him, double-checking systems, correcting one minor input with a quiet correction instead of public humiliation. He was green, sure, but he was trying. And that was the thing no one ever tells you about being in the cockpit. It's not about having all the answers. It's about not folding when things get turbulent. It's about staying upright, staying alert, and staying grounded even when you're 35,000 feet above the world. I used to think that being a pilot was about precision and control. Now I know. It's about steadiness in chaos. It's about trusting yourself, even when no one else does. We took off without incident. The city fell away beneath us. The clouds closed in. And still, we flew. Sometimes, the sharpest cuts don't come from strangers, but from the people who were supposed to protect you. Felicity's story isn't just about betrayal, it's about choosing resilience when no one believes in you, and standing tall when even your family wants you grounded. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after being torn down by those closest to you? If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe, because we have more powerful real-life stories coming your way. Let's keep this conversation going in the comments. Hi, my name is Velda, and my half-sister didn't just betray me, she poured acid into my food, hoping no one would ever taste my truth. At first, my name was missing from the will, then from the family photos, then from the table. But when she served my recipe on national television and smiled like it had always been hers, I realized I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been erased. And the worst part? Everyone applauded her for it. So how did she end up the one silenced forever? And what really happened when she took a bite of her own revenge? My half-sister poured acid into my food, but she ended up tasting the poison of her own revenge. I remember the exact click of the doorknob as I stepped into that lawyer's office. It was the same kind of polished wood my father loved, mahogany, smooth as stone under your palm, always smelling like a mix of tobacco and old paper. I had walked through doors like this 1,000 times with him, back when I was still his shadow in the kitchen, watching him dice onions with the precision of a surgeon. But that day, that door opened to a room that didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. Everyone was already seated. Malis, of course, was at the center, her hair pinned back neatly, designer blazer too crisp for a Thursday afternoon in Savannah. Our cousins, 2 uncles, and even Aunt Helen, who hadn't visited in 6 years, were there. I stood at the edge, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. The lawyer, Mr. Donahue, barely looked up when he began reading. "To my beloved daughter Malis," he started, and something in my chest gave out like a chair missing a leg. I didn't hear the rest, not really. The room spun slowly as phrases like legacy, restaurant rights, and public brand floated by like steam off a forgotten kettle. My name never came, not once. It was like I didn't exist. In my mind, I saw Dad's hand guiding mine 20 years earlier as he whispered over the hiss of a skillet. "This recipe stays with you, baby. Not because it's written down, but because you feel it." Even ghosts deserve a chair at the table. I didn't get one. When the meeting wrapped, I quietly turned toward the door. I made it just past the coat rack when I heard Malis's voice behind me, hushed but sharp. "She's probably too ashamed to look at anyone." I paused. For half a second, I thought about turning around, saying something, anything, but instead, I breathed in, let it settle in my chest, and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. Outside, Savannah still carried that sticky warmth that made you feel like summer was eavesdropping. I walked past oak trees dripping with Spanish moss, back to my tiny apartment where the paint peeled near the windowsill. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the chipped ceramic plate that used to belong to my father. Not even the plate got a mention in that will. The next evening, Malis hosted a celebration dinner. I received the invitation via a group text, along with the time, the dress code, and a note that said family only. Apparently, I still qualified when it was convenient. I wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no makeup. I arrived 10 minutes early and was told to wait near the kitchen. A waiter eventually led me to my seat, table 6, right next to the restroom. The smell of bleach wafted every time the door opened. I could hear someone sobbing quietly in the next stall, their heels tapping against the tile. Meanwhile, across the room, Malis sat under a chandelier that glittered like applause. Her table had gold-rimmed plates, 3 types of wine glasses, and silver cutlery that practically winked under the soft light. Mine? My fork had a slight bend. The water glass was cloudy with age. I smiled anyway. Because smiling is how you survive in rooms where your presence is an inconvenience. "Thank you all for being here," Malis stood and said with a practiced grin. Dad believed in legacy, and tonight, I'm honored to continue his dream. People clapped. Someone shouted, "You deserve it, girl!" And I felt my hands grow colder. A family friend leaned over and asked, "Oh, are you on staff tonight?" Her tone was sweet, unassuming, but it stabbed anyway. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm his other daughter." She blinked. "Oh, I thought, never mind." I wasn't mad. I was used to it, used to being the shadow behind the flame. That night, I didn't stay for dessert. I excused myself before the plates were cleared, walked down Whitaker Street, and let the streetlights guide me home. My heels clicked against the pavement like a metronome, steady, restrained. The city was quiet, except for a passing streetcar and the occasional dog bark. When I reached my apartment building, I stood outside a while longer, looking up at the third-floor window where my kitchen light still glowed. The window faced east, facing the street my father and I used to walk after Sunday lunch, just before his arthritis got too bad to move without wincing. The building next door had once housed his little eatery, back before the brand deals and television spots Malis brought in. Now, it sat empty. The signage gone. Only the ghost of the word Grafton's remained. Paint faded, just barely clinging to the brick. I looked up, inhaled, and whispered to no one in particular, "I may not be written into the will, but I'm not invisible." After whispering those words to myself outside the empty building that once held my father's dreams, I didn't go straight home. I walked, not aimlessly, but slow enough for the streetlights to stretch my thoughts. It was like I needed the space between steps to figure out what the silence in me had started to say out loud. That night, when I got in, I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I flicked on the old stove lamp, the one that always gave off a soft yellow glow like a porch light, waiting for someone to come home. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table my dad and I used to knead dough on, back before our family became two sides of a court case. My fingers traced the edge of the wooden surface. That table had scars, nicks from knives, heat marks from pans set down too fast. And it was at that table that I had first shown Malis the beginning of what became my signature dish. It had been a Sunday afternoon, one of the rare times she'd joined me in the kitchen. She'd walked in with her usual perfume cloud, and that look like she was doing the world a favor by simply existing. She asked questions about spices, genuine ones, I'd thought. I even let her write down a few things in my notebook. I didn't know then that she'd been memorizing everything. What hit me hardest wasn't that she'd taken the recipe. It was that she didn't even flinch when she used it. She didn't hesitate to brand it, sell it, rename it like it had always belonged to her, like I'd just been some helpful bystander in her story of success. 2 days after that dinner party, I was over at Aunt Raina's house, helping her organize boxes in the garage. She's always been one of the few family members who didn't pick sides, mostly because she never saw the point in taking orders from Malis or anyone else. While we sorted through dusty boxes labeled Xmas Lights and old cookbooks, her teenage son Darren was watching videos on his phone. "Yo," he called out. "Isn't this your sister?" I looked up, wiping my hands on my jeans. He tilted the screen toward me. There she was, Malis, standing center stage at the Southern Food Masters semifinals, smiling like the crowd had been clapping for her since birth. Chef Malis debuts her signature dish, Sunlit Citrus Blaze, the announcer's voice boomed. I stared at the screen, the dish, the color, the garnish, the precise flame-finished citrus curl at the top. It was mine. Every element, every detail I had sweated over for months, right down to the plate. Dad's old ceramic-rimmed bowl. And that name, Sunlit Citrus Blaze? It was a cheap rebrand of what I had always called Fire Fruit Fusion. My throat went dry, not out of shock, no, this had always been a possibility. But something about seeing it broadcast, about watching her bask in credit that didn't belong to her. It felt like being erased in real time. Later that evening, I checked the family group chat. I knew I shouldn't have, but I did. Aunt Helen wrote, "She's glowing, just like her daddy." Uncle Travis followed with, "Malis, you nailed it. He'd be so proud. You're his culinary twin." No one mentioned me, not a single emoji, not a side comment. I could have been a ghost in that thread. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a screenshot. It wasn't about keeping receipts. It was about reminding myself of the silence they chose. That night, I didn't sleep well. My mind kept looping the video in flashes, her voice thanking the judges, her smile, the way she tilted her head just like Dad used to when he explained a flavor profile. I didn't confront her. I could have sent a message, left a voicemail, maybe even showed up at her doorstep, but there was no use in throwing stones at a house built on applause. Instead, I opened one of the few things I had left that connected me to my father, his recipe journal. It was worn, the leather cracked at the spine, corners curled like old leaves. On the third page, in his sharp, slanted handwriting, was a line I hadn't read in years. "The fire in her hands will outlive my name." He wasn't talking about Malis. She'd never spent more than 10 minutes near a stove unless a camera was on. He was talking about me. That line wasn't flattery, it was recognition. I read it again, then again, until the words no longer blurred but burned. At midnight, I turned on the lamp again. I tied my apron behind my back, not the pristine one, the old one with oil stains and my initials stitched in the corner. I opened the fridge, pulled out citrus, ginger, garlic, the core ingredients. I lit the burner, let it hiss and snap like old memories being reheated. I didn't cook like someone preparing for war. I cooked like someone remembering who they were before the world tried to convince them otherwise. My hands moved with memory. I wasn't chasing perfection. I was chasing something older than that. Truth, the kind you can taste. As the sauce simmered, I whispered aloud, not to Malis, not to anyone in particular, but to myself and to the air that had always listened better than most people in my family. She can steal the spotlight, but not the soul. The dish still simmered when I turned off the stove that night, but something inside me had already reached a quiet boil. I cleaned up, Not because I wanted to, but because my father always said, "A cook's pride lives in their cleanup, not just their plating." After wiping down the counters, I sat in the soft kitchen light, letting the scent of citrus and spice fade into the walls. 2 days later, as I sat in my small living room folding laundry, a text came through from Aunt Raina. "Thought you'd want to see this. Your sister's made it again." I clicked the link. It opened to a local Savannah food blog titled Southern Star, Malis Carey's Culinary Legacy Forward. My eyes skimmed the first paragraph, not that I expected anything different. But then, there it was. A photo from our childhood kitchen. The caption read, "Young Malis learning under her father's watchful eye." The problem, I was in that photo. Only you couldn't tell. A deliberate blur of steam covered my face. I knew that blur because I remembered standing there, holding the knife, while Dad stood behind me, guiding my hand as I sliced through a mango for what would later become the base of Fire Fruit Fusion. Malis hadn't touched a single utensil that day. She'd walked in to grab soda, posed for a second, and walked back out. Now, 2 decades later, the world was being sold a version where she was the star of a moment she hadn't even earned. It wasn't just erasure, it was rewriting. I set my phone down slowly, hands trembling, not with anger, but something colder, something weightier. I wasn't shocked. That kind of betrayal no longer surprised me. What stuck like a pit in my throat was how natural she made it look, as if I'd never been there at all. Later that week, I watched the recording of her award ceremony. Someone in the family had uploaded it to Facebook, complete with hearts and clapping emojis. Malis stood at the podium in a silky navy dress, hair swept into a perfect bun, wearing an expression I knew all too well, like she owned the room before she ever opened her mouth. "I want to thank my mother," she began. "My aunts and uncles, my cousins, especially Denny and Theo, for always believing in me," she continued, listing names like a practiced politician. Not once did my name cross her lips. No Velda, no my sister, not even a vague someone special who helped inspire this. Then she said, clear and sure, "I've always believed talent is inherited, not claimed." The crowd laughed, clapped, some nodded with approving grins. I sat there in my apartment, watching it unfold. My tea went cold. My heart didn't beat faster, but deeper. It settled into a place of stillness where sorrow no longer had a home. What I felt now was purpose. That same day, I got an unexpected email from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Avon. He was now managing one of the regional culinary schools, the same place Malis had done a guest lecture weeks earlier. His email was short, just one sentence. "Saw her dish. Something about it felt familiar." That was it. No accusations, no assumptions. But it was enough. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to decide what that sentence meant to me. That night, after washing the dishes and tidying up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the old notebook Dad had left behind. Tucked between 2 stained pages was a memory I hadn't thought of in years. I was 10. Dad had invited both Malis and me into the kitchen for what he called Saturday sauce sessions. Malis had groaned, said, "Why would I spend my weekend smelling like onions?" and stormed off. I'd stayed. I stayed through the burn of garlic in my eyes, through the hours it took to get the texture right, through the way Dad had corrected my grip until my fingers cramped. He didn't pat me on the back. He didn't give me ribbons. He just said, "You stayed. That matters." Now the world clapped for the one who walked out. I whispered aloud, "And now they say it's hers." It was getting late, but sleep wouldn't come. So I opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote a title in all caps, "Things They Erased." Underneath, I began listing. The photo Malis used in the article, the award speech with no mention of me, the night she took my recipe notes and said she was just curious, the restaurant name Dad chose, how she later trademarked it without asking. By the time I looked up, nearly 3 pages were filled. I flipped to a blank sticky note and scribbled, "Step 1, keep cooking." Then another, "Step 2, let the world see what truth tastes like." It wasn't a revenge plan. It was a recipe. The message from Avon sat in my inbox like a flickering pilot light. Small, quiet, but ready to ignite something larger. I didn't answer him right away. I let it sit there, open, visible, like a page in a book I wasn't quite finished reading. The following Saturday, I received an invitation, hand-delivered by a courier in a crisp black suit who didn't say much. Inside was a card from Melis, elegantly embossed with silver lettering. Pre-competition family dinner, hosted by Melis Carrington, formal attire, 6:00 p.m., sharp. There was no note, no personal message, just a time, a place, and the silent assumption that I would attend. I stared at the invitation for a few moments, then placed it on the counter next to the sticky notes I'd written days earlier. Step 1. Keep cooking. Step 2. Let the world see what truth tastes like. Step 3, I now realized, would require me to walk back into the very space I had once been erased from, and not flinch. Saturday came quickly. I dressed in a navy wrap dress I'd worn to 2 funerals and 1 job interview. It wasn't flashy, but it fit, and more importantly, it felt like armor. As I pulled into the Carrington estate, yes, she had renamed it, the driveway was already lined with luxury cars. I parked farther down the road, as usual. Some things didn't change, even when everything else had. The house looked just as I remembered, symmetrical, too polished, like it belonged in a catalog, not real life. The front door opened before I even knocked. A young server greeted me, not with a smile, but with practiced neutrality. "Velda Carrington?" he asked, reading off a clipboard. "Right this way." I nodded and followed him through the marble entryway, past the curated decor, into the dining room. The air changed the moment I stepped in. Conversations quieted, glasses were set down. It was the kind of silence people make when they don't know if they should acknowledge your presence or pretend you're part of the wallpaper. Melis stood at the head of the table, already holding court, her voice mid-story. When she saw me, she gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, look who decided to grace us," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Don't worry, Velda. We saved you a seat, right by the window." I walked over and sat down without saying a word. The chair wobbled slightly. My napkin had already been unwrapped and folded beside my plate. Dinner began the way most awkward family meals do. Too many forks, not enough sincerity. I focused on my plate, barely touching the salmon, while small talk buzzed like white noise around me. Halfway through the meal, someone, maybe one of Melis's new investor friends, stood up and raised a glass. "To Melis," he said, "the rightful heir to Savannah's culinary crown." People clapped, some louder than others. I raised my glass slowly. Didn't drink, just held it in the air, letting the condensation run down my fingers like melted dignity. That's when it happened. From the kitchen, someone rushed in, whispering frantically to a staff member. Their eyes darted toward Melis, then toward me. "Has anyone seen the envelope?" a voice called out. "The sponsorship cash envelope? It's missing." Melis stood slowly, scanning the room like a queen surveying her court. "It was right here," she said, "next to the gift bags." A few people started glancing around. A murmur passed from one guest to the next. Then another voice, sharper this time. "We should check everyone's things." Before I could respond, a server approached me, holding my handbag like it was a dirty diaper. "Miss Carrington," he said, "we found this inside." He held up the envelope, creased, slightly open, and full of $100 bills. My throat tightened. "That's not mine," I said firmly. No one spoke. Melis stepped forward, eyebrows raised just enough to sell concern. "I'm sure it's just a mix-up," she said sweetly. "But you understand, we had to check." "Of course," I replied, my voice even. "You always check when something goes missing, just not when credit goes missing, or names, or memories." The room stayed quiet. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. Not rushed, not flustered, just done. As I turned to leave, someone near the doorway, a woman I didn't recognize, leaned toward the man next to her and whispered, not softly enough, "Isn't she the maid? Why is she even sitting at the table?" A few chuckles followed. Not loud, but enough. Melis didn't correct her. Didn't say a word. I didn't look back. I walked past the framed family photos in the hallway, Every single one a curated version of history where I'd either been cropped out or never invited to begin with. And then I passed the portrait of my mother, hung just before the kitchen. I paused, just for a moment. Then I walked outside, the door closing softly behind me. The sky was darkening, streetlights flickering on. I made my way to the sidewalk, heels clicking steadily, each step burning off another layer of shame. When I got home, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Its title, Proof. Inside, I started organizing everything I had: screenshots, video clips, copies of emails, old handwritten notes of Dad's recipes. I scanned every photo Melis had posted and matched them to original timestamps in my own archives. Then I opened a private message tab. Avon. I didn't say hello, didn't ask how he was. I simply typed, "Would you recognize a stolen dish if you saw the original?" The reply came a few minutes later. "Yes, especially if it was yours." The moment I read Avon's message, I felt my spine straighten in the kitchen chair like someone had pulled a string down my back. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. It was the space he left for me to decide what came next. 5 days before the regional finals, an invitation arrived at my door. This one wasn't sent through a courier. It was slid under the front door, just before dawn, like it didn't want to be seen entering my life. It was from Melis. "Family reconciliation dinner," the header read in her looping cursive. "Let's move forward, together. 6 p.m., Thursday." No apology, no acknowledgement, just another spotlight moment with the word family stitched on for convenience. I didn't RSVP. I just showed up. That Thursday, Savannah felt like it was holding its breath. The sky was a chalky gray, the kind that made you keep a jacket in the back seat just in case. I wore something simple: black slacks, a burgundy blouse, and shoes that made no sound when I walked. When I arrived at the house, the door was already open. That alone told me everything I needed to know. They were expecting me, but not as a guest. Inside, everything looked the same: the manicured entryway, the polished banister, the faint smell of citrus cleaner Melis always preferred over anything floral. It felt like stepping into a play where I wasn't handed a script. The dining room was lit to perfection, soft gold tones reflecting off the glasses. Melis stood near the head of the table, a glass of white wine in hand, rehearsing smiles for each new guest. When she saw me, she tilted her head slightly. "Velda, I wasn't sure you'd come." "I'm sure you weren't," I said calmly, stepping in fully. There were no hugs, no hellos, just small nods from relatives who'd once rocked me to sleep, now too invested in keeping things clean and pleasant. I took my seat, same end of the table as last time. Only this time, no one made a fuss. Dinner began like a play with too many acts: forced laughter, obligatory questions, an air of rehearsed forgiveness. Melis dominated the conversation, talking about the competition, the judges, and how our family legacy was now in her hands. Then came the toast. Uncle Howard stood with a glass and cleared his throat. "To Melis," he began, "for carrying the Carrington name into every Southern kitchen. We're proud of you." A chorus of glasses clinked. I waited until the sound settled. Then I stood. I didn't say anything at first. I reached into my bag, pulled out an envelope, and placed it gently in the center of the table. Eyes followed it like it might explode. Melis blinked. "What's this?" "A declaration," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You can read it later. It's notarized. I've waived my claim to the inheritance." There were a few gasps, mostly from cousins who cared more about the drama than the money. "But," I continued, "at the bottom, you'll see a line I added. It reads, 'This does not waive my birthright, nor the name my father gave me.'" A silence heavier than gravy spread across the table. Melis tried to recover quickly. "Well, Velda. Sorry, Velda. That's quite noble of you." The pause between the names was intentional. Everyone at the table felt it. I didn't flinch. Instead, I looked her square in the eyes and replied, "Funny. You always get my name wrong, but you remembered my recipe just fine." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Aunt Raina sipped her water like it suddenly had flavor. I sat down slowly. The conversation didn't recover. Dessert arrived in silence. Pecan pie, Melis's favorite, not Dad's. When it was over, people stood to leave, murmuring polite goodbyes, pretending to check their phones. As I picked up my purse, one of my younger cousins leaned toward me, voice barely above a whisper. "You're stronger than they think," she said. I didn't reply, just nodded. I walked out without looking back. The air outside felt cooler than when I'd arrived, like the house had been breathing in heat and holding it hostage. Driving home, I didn't put on music. I let the silence stretch. I needed it. By the time I stepped into my kitchen, it was close to midnight. But I wasn't tired. I was clear. I tied my apron behind me, turned on the stove, laid out ingredients with care, each motion deliberate, like I was carving my name into the night. This wasn't about nostalgia anymore. This time, I was cooking for more than memory. After I whispered those words to the spice drawer, "Let's finish this the right way," I didn't hesitate. I closed the drawer, washed my hands, and turned off the light in my kitchen. The next few days would test every ounce of control I had left, and I couldn't afford to let rage drive the wheel. Not anymore. This wasn't about being angry. This was about being undeniable. The morning of the regional competition arrived like Savannah herself was holding her breath. The streets were damp from the night's rain, and the sky hung low with a kind of quiet pressure. I left my apartment before sunrise, my apron folded precisely in my tote, knives wrapped in the same cloth Dad used when he taught me how to sharpen them. When I arrived at the Culinary Academy, Avon was already outside the prep entrance, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. He didn't say much. He just handed me a badge and said, "You got this." Then he walked away before I could respond. That small moment, his calm, his belief, settled into my bones. I headed to my station, set up my ingredients, and ran through my checklist like it was gospel. Everything felt right. Everything felt earned. That is, until I stepped away to use the restroom and returned 10 minutes later to find things off. My spice rack had been rearranged. My sauce, one I'd left simmering, was bubbling too aggressively. The smell sharper, acrid. I leaned in, stirred, and something in my gut told me this wasn't heat. It was sabotage. I didn't panic. I didn't call anyone over. I simply took the pot off the stove, set it aside, and pulled out a backup batch I had prepped the night before. Something told me I'd need it. I wasn't wrong. Later that afternoon, one of the assistant chefs flagged down a supervisor near my station. He held up a small plastic container, the label peeled off, but still partially legible. It had been stuffed behind my prep box. "Smells industrial," he said, handing it to Avon. Avon sniffed it once, grimaced, and said one word: bleach. That was all it took. The air in the kitchen turned icy. Someone called over the Culinary Board's internal inspector. There was a quiet investigation, no alarms, no accusations, just the kind of tight-lipped professionalism that tells you people are about to pretend nothing happened. But I knew better. I knew who had done it. That evening, I received another invitation, this time to Melis's so-called family support reception following the day's events. The finals were only 2 days away, and she had already begun building the narrative. The story was hers. Again, I considered skipping it, but something told me I needed to be there, to see what came next. I arrived just after 7. The house was already full, music humming low, the smell of catered hors d'oeuvres thick in the air. Before I could set down my purse, someone handed me a tray. "Can you bring this to the patio?" the young woman asked without looking me in the eye. I stared at the tray, then at her. "You think I work here?" She blinked. "Aren't you—" She didn't finish the sentence. I took the tray anyway, walked it through the crowd, and placed it on the patio table with a calm I didn't know I still had left. From across the room, I caught Melis watching me, her expression unreadable. She didn't approach. She didn't apologize. She just watched like a hawk sizing up another predator. As I made my way back inside, I heard a man's voice murmur to his wife. "Didn't she work here before?" The wife laughed. "Might as well." That was enough for me. I left without saying a word. The next morning, I arrived at the academy early again. This time, I didn't go to my station. I found Avon in his office, staring at a screen. He motioned for me to come closer, then hit play. The footage was crystal clear. Mylis, wearing a pristine white coat, her hair pulled back like she belonged in a commercial, walked over to my workstation. She looked around, then pulled a small container from her pocket, unscrewed it, poured something into my sauce. It wasn't just caught on tape. It was undeniable. I watched the footage twice, then turned to Avon. "Send me a copy," I said quietly. "It's time." He nodded. That night, I didn't sleep. I uploaded the footage to a private drive. Then I forwarded it, anonymously, to the regional board with a subject line that simply read, "For your integrity review." I didn't include a message. The video said everything. Afterward, I returned to my kitchen, reopened the spice drawer, and pulled out the one Dad labeled Rescue Mix, a blend of heat and depth he only used when a dish needed saving. I laid it on the counter, took out my notes, and began again. This wasn't about beating Mylis anymore. This was about restoring what she had tried to destroy. My identity, my name, my place at the table. I whispered again, this time not to the drawer, but to the air itself. "Let's finish this the right way." I arrived early for the finals that night, not out of nerves, but necessity. I needed to feel the room before it filled, needed to breathe in its emptiness before it became something else. A stage, a crucible, a trap. The Savannah Culinary Academy's grand demonstration hall had always towered above me when I was younger. Vaulted ceilings that echoed every footstep. Marble floors so smooth they felt like mirrors underfoot. There was no room for error here, no shadows to hide in. Just light, just scrutiny. Tonight, every inch of this space would be watching. My station was set with surgical precision, ingredients lined up like soldiers, sauces portioned, spices measured, every blade honed, every pan polished to a mirror's edge. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. The recipe for fire fruit fusion pulsed through me like a second heartbeat. My father's voice echoed in each step, steady as breath. I didn't come to prove anything. I came to tell the truth. By 6, the guests began to arrive. Judges took their seats with measured expressions and the stiff, slow grace of people trained never to react. They carried clipboards, wore polite nods, the kind of faces that made you doubt your own senses. The cameras were already perched, tripods steady, red lights glowing. I spotted Avon near the front, his arms crossed, body still but alert. He wasn't smiling, but when he met my gaze, he gave a slight nod. It wasn't encouragement. It was acknowledgement. "You're here. I see you." That was enough. By 7:30, the competition officially began. And, like clockwork, Mylis arrived late. Of course she did. Always the last to enter, always the first to be noticed. She claimed it was about drama, flair, but we both knew what it really was. Dominance. Control. She wore red, a bold, blood-colored coat dress that stood in sharp contrast to the sea of pressed white chef coats. Her heels echoed like punctuation marks. Her smile was glossy and easy. Her eyes were anything but. She gave me one glance, measured, cool, and moved on. We were each given 45 minutes. Just one dish, just one shot. We moved with purpose. Our stations clicked into rhythm. Flames rising, metal clattering, oils simmering low. I didn't look her way once. I didn't need to. I had the meat already marinated. The sauce simmered, layered with heat and sweetness, cooled to just the right pitch. I caramelized the fruit until it shimmered under the kitchen lights. Every plate I touched was treated like an altar. Tonight wasn't about performance. It was about proof. Then came the sound. A sharp crash, like the world splitting open. I turned, along with everyone else. Mylis stood frozen. Her plate, her final dish, lay shattered at her feet, porcelain and charred meat scattered across the floor like ruins. For a moment, she just stared at it. And then, without missing a beat, she pivoted, straight toward the prep table behind me. I knew before I even saw her hands reach. My blood chilled. She reached for a sealed container, one of dozens, neatly labeled and stacked, identical in appearance. Except this one wasn't like the others. I had marked it, compromised, handwritten, faintly smudged but still legible if you looked. She didn't look. She didn't care. This was the batch I'd set aside after discovering someone had tampered with it, altered the proportions of a spice blend I hadn't used since the training rounds. I hadn't discarded it. I kept it, quietly, as documentation. In case she tried something else, now it was in her hands. She opened the lid, stirred it once, and began plating with clinical precision. I said nothing. Neither did Avon. Silence was sharper than confrontation. The judges began tasting. I watched. Malis stepped up to the podium, posture flawless, voice echoing through the room. I present Sunlit Citrus Blaze, built on tradition, elevated with passion. The first judge took a bite. He blinked, then flinched. Subtle, but real. The second paused, fork halfway to his lips, then reached for his water instead. The third leaned back, brow furrowed, lips pursed. Something was wrong. Everyone felt it. Still smiling, Malis dipped her own spoon in, probably to maintain her charade, to reinforce her ownership of the dish, to close the loop with performance. She didn't even swallow. The moment the sauce touched her tongue, her body betrayed her. The smile collapsed, her eyes widened, her body lurched. She recoiled, coughing, gasping, red spreading across her face, hands trembling. The spoon clattered to the floor. A judge stood and called for help. The room burst into motion. The MC dropped his mic. Guests stood, some filming, some shouting. Phones rose like waves crashing in the fluorescent sea. And I stood still. Hands resting gently on my counter, like stone in the center of a storm. Paramedics arrived within minutes. She was escorted out, blotched and breathless, mouth swollen, unable to speak clearly. Someone whispered, allergic reaction. Someone else said, cross-contamination. I said nothing. Avon said nothing. The competition was paused, then quietly, cancelled. No winner declared, no trophies handed out. Just silence. I stayed behind as the room emptied. At some point, I ended up sitting near the prep sinks, the stainless steel cool beneath my palms. I stared at my own reflection in a pot that hadn't yet been scrubbed. I wasn't sure how long I'd been there when Avon approached. He held up his phone. They know it wasn't you, he said. The footage is already circulating. I nodded once. What about her? I asked. It wasn't vengeance, just curiosity. He sighed, eyes distant. Chemical burns, he said. Severe. The doctors are doing what they can, but the prognosis isn't good. The taste buds don't always recover. I said nothing. Didn't cheer. Didn't rage. I just let the weight settle. Malis, the woman who had built her entire empire on her palate, had lost the one thing that could not be faked. The irony didn't feel sweet. It felt complete. Later that night, lying in bed with the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, I glanced at my phone. A headline pulsed across the screen. Top culinary star suffers taste loss in mysterious incident during competition. I didn't click it. I didn't need to. The truth was already simmering. And this time, I wasn't the one left burned. I woke up the next morning to a kitchen still soaked in silence. The sun hadn't fully risen, but I was already dressed, coffee brewed, and the floor beneath my bare feet colder than usual. Outside, birds chirped like the world hadn't changed, but something had. There were no reporters at my door. No social media mobs chanting my name or dragging hers through the dirt. And yet, I knew. The storm had already started brewing somewhere far louder than the space I stood in. By 9, I was rinsing dishes when a soft ping echoed from my phone. An email, subject line, "Your father's truth." There was no sender's name, just a secure link and a one-line message. He meant for you to have this. My breath caught as I clicked. It opened to a voice recording, dated 2 months before his stroke. I hesitated before pressing play. My hands trembled, and I gripped the edge of the counter like it might brace me for what came next. Then, his voice. "Velda," he began, raspy but firm. "If you're hearing this, then the truth still matters. That dish, it was always yours. You learned it with your hands, your patience, your heart. Malis didn't want it. She didn't care about the history, the soul of it, but you stayed. You stayed when no one else did. A pause. I'm proud of you. I just hope one day the world sees it too. I didn't realize I'd started crying until the tears hit my sleeves. It wasn't just a recipe he'd given me, it was acknowledgement, a validation I had waited for, not with hope, but with the kind of quiet desperation only those who've been repeatedly erased can understand. I played the message again and again, until it was no longer pain that made me cry, but release. Around noon, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the folder labeled Proof. It wasn't vengeance I felt anymore, it was duty. I uploaded the voice clip and paired it with the security footage, Malis in full color, pouring bleach into my pot like it was nothing but another secret ingredient. Then I logged into a private forum where industry professionals and culinary insiders quietly exchanged ideas, critiques, and sometimes confessions. I posted everything. No caption, no commentary, just the raw truth. By nightfall, it had spread farther than I expected. Food bloggers picked it up first, then regional newspapers, then one of the more prominent chef networks did a full exposé titled The Firefruit Scandal, How Theft and Sabotage Burned a Star. I didn't leave the house that night. I didn't need to. I watched it all unfold from my phone while sitting in the same chair my dad used to sip his Sunday coffee in. By morning, Malis's name was trending, and not in the way she liked. The Academy released a short statement. We are aware of the allegations involving former student Malis Carrington. An internal review has been initiated. Until further notice, all professional affiliations are suspended. Then came the sponsors, one after another, dropping her like a bad investment. The biggest cookware brand she represented replaced her with a chef from Atlanta within 24 hours. Avon sent me a text just after lunch. They're calling it the Firefruit Scandal. You were brave. I didn't reply, not because I wasn't grateful, but because I didn't feel brave. I just felt resolved. 3 days later, a reporter called, then another. They wanted interviews, sound bites, my face next to headlines that read like redemption arcs written by someone else. I declined them all. I didn't need the world to hear me speak. They had already heard my father's voice. Instead, I focused on something far more important. I reopened my father's kitchen, not in name, in spirit. The building had been sitting empty for months. The sign above the doorway, once reading Carrington Daughters, had been taken down after his passing. I chose something different. Em Ut, Vietnamese for youngest daughter. A nod to the name he used when we were alone in the kitchen, cooking late into the night while Malis scrolled through magazines. It took weeks of deep cleaning, permits, late nights painting walls, and scrubbing the ghosts off tile. But when it opened, we didn't have a ribbon-cutting ceremony. We didn't need it. On the first night, people came quietly, a few locals. A couple of culinary students who recognized me from the forums. A woman who used to work with my father brought a bouquet of fresh herbs. I cooked behind the counter like I always had, apron tied, hair pulled back, silence filled with scent. The dish, Firefruit Fusion, unedited, unrebranded. The same version I had memorized through muscle memory, layered with the kind of heat that told a story with every bite. The first review landed on a small blog 2 days later. It read, "Every bite tastes like someone who chose truth over applause." That night, I stood in the kitchen long after the last customer left. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just listened to the quiet hum of the fridges, the faint clink of a spoon left soaking in a sink, the echo of my father's words in the corners of the room. I never wanted revenge, but life served it anyway. 6 months had passed since that night at the academy, the night when the truth, long buried beneath image and expectation, finally stood up, pulled out a chair, and sat beside me like an old friend who'd waited too long to be heard. It hadn't come with applause. It came quietly, and that was how I wanted it to stay. Now, it was early spring in Savannah, that kind of season where everything begins to bloom again, but gently, without announcement. The magnolias were just starting to open, bold white blossoms pushing out through stubborn winter branches like forgiveness itself. Not the kind of forgiveness you give to others because they've earned it, but the kind you offer yourself because you're finally ready to let go of what never served you. The air carried a subtle warmth, like the city had taken a long breath and was exhaling softly, whispering, "You've survived." The reopening of my father's kitchen wasn't grand. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no PR team orchestrating Instagram teasers or last-minute press blasts, no sponsored posts or countdowns. I didn't hire a photographer or pitch the story to the local food blogs. I didn't need spectacle, just a new beginning. All I did was hang a hand-painted wooden sign above the door, letters carved one afternoon with sandpaper and patience. It was enough. That morning, just before 8 o'clock a.m., I unlocked the door myself. The key turned without resistance. Something about that felt symbolic. Inside, the scent of lemon oil and charred wood still lingered in the air. The kind of seasoning you don't wash away, not because you can't, but because you shouldn't. The stove I'd restored and seasoned myself stood proud, humming quietly like it remembered everything. Soft pendant lights glowed overhead. The front counter had been buffed to a shine. 3 tables sat waiting, modest, sturdy, familiar. Like old friends who knew your stories and didn't need them retold. I didn't know if anyone would come, but they did. The first to arrive was a neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Germain, who had always left her porch light on late, even when no one came home. Then a retired couple who used to eat here when my father ran the place. They told me he once brought them a bowl of soup on the house when they were grieving a loss they hadn't even spoken out loud. Word traveled, not like fire, like warmth. By noon, the tables were full. No frenzy, no line out the door, just a steady stream of people who came not to be impressed, but to be fed. By 6 o'clock p.m., I was sold out. I hadn't served anything designed to trend. No fancy plating, no nitrogen clouds or edible gold leaf. Just food that tasted like truth. The original fire fruit fusion. Chicken braised low and slow in garlic and lemongrass until it pulled apart with a glance. Sweet corn grits, just like Dad used to make them, rich with coconut cream and a hint of lime. I plated each dish with both hands, every motion anchored in memory, in freedom, in the knowledge that I had nothing left to prove. Close to closing, as I was wiping down the prep station, he came in, a boy, maybe 10, maybe younger. Round glasses perched too big for his face. His hands clung to his mother's as they finished their meal. She nudged him gently toward me. He approached, hesitating for only a second before stepping up to the counter. "Miss Velda?" he asked. His voice was soft, but certain. I leaned down, damp cloth still in hand. "Yes, sweetheart?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Do you think someone like me could ever cook like this?" And there it was. The question I'd once asked in my own way. The kind that doesn't just want advice, it wants belief. So I knelt beside him, wiped my hands on my apron, and smiled. "If you cook with heart," I said, "they'll always taste it, every single time." His face lit up, not for praise, but for possibility. That moment, that meant more to me than any trophy Malis ever took credit for. That night, after the last dish was dried and the lights turned low, I locked up and took the long way home. I walked, no headphones, no podcast, just me, the cool breeze, and the city exhaling around me. I passed the building that had once housed Melis's restaurant. It stood hollow now, the lights off. The sign cracked and barely hanging, one half missing entirely, the other clinging to the siding like a forgotten promise. A poster was still taped to the front window, its corners curling like dying petals. "Taste the legacy." Someone had scratched her name out, hard, deep. I didn't smile, I didn't scoff, I didn't feel victorious, I just kept walking. That building wasn't a monument to failure. It was a monument to truth, the kind that endures long after press releases and publicists lose their grip. When I got home, I pulled on my oldest pair of sweats and poured myself a cup of green tea. The walls were quiet, but not empty. The air was full of something softer. I turned on the Bluetooth speaker my dad had given me just before he passed, still wrapped in duct tape, still a little busted. I scrolled through my private playlist, all the way to the bottom. Track 99. "Dad, final message." I pressed play. His voice filled the room like wind slipping through a screen door. "If you're still cooking, then I know you're still fighting." a pause. Not against people, but for yourself, for what matters. I let the message play through, untouched. Then I turned off the lights and sat with the stillness. It no longer felt like waiting. It felt like belonging. In the weeks that followed, offers came in. Book deals, TV pilots, guest chef appearances. I said no, not from bitterness, but because I didn't want a brand. I wanted a home. Oot was enough. A place where I knew every corner, every groove in the countertop, every hum of the oven when it's ready, not because a timer tells me, but because I know. A place where people didn't come for spectacle. They came for something warm, something real. The final piece of closure arrived with no fanfare, a tan envelope in my mailbox, no return address. Inside, a folded photograph, the original, me and Dad in the kitchen. The same image Malis had once edited to blur me out, steam added where my face had been. But not this time. This one was clear. There I was, 12 years old, too small for the chef's coat, holding a cleaver nearly as long as my arm. Dad behind me, one hand on my shoulder, smiling. No note, just the picture. I framed it, hung it above the register. Not to prove anything, not to gloat, but to remember, to tell the truth, to mark the beginning of a legacy that belonged to both of us, not built on ego or erasure, but fire, family, and flavor. And maybe one day, someone will make my recipe, not for likes, not for followers, but for the people at their table. And that will be enough. Because it always was. Sometimes, the justice we seek doesn't come through confrontation, but through quiet, unwavering truth. Velda didn't scream, didn't fight dirty. She simply let her integrity do the speaking. What would you have done if you were her? Would you have walked away? Or stayed and reclaimed your name? If this story moved you, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one, because sometimes the quietest voices echo the loudest. Hello, my name is Nia. 17 years ago, I got hit by a car, and while I lay there bleeding in the street, my mother stood on the sidewalk, pulled her cap down, and walked away. She saw me, and she left. Now she says she wants peace. But what she really wants is my signature. Proof she was a good mother. She's already erased me from family photos, told neighbors I'm unstable, and faked fainting outside my office. And yet somehow she still believes I'm the problem. Would you sign a lie just to keep the peace? Because I didn't. And 5 minutes later, the police showed up. So tell me, what would you do if the person who hurt you the most called it love? It hit me before I saw it. Just the sound. Tires screaming on asphalt. The shrill panic of a horn. That dreadful second of silence when every muscle in your body tenses as if it's bracing for an impact you can't see. I wasn't in danger. Not really. I was just crossing Madison and 5th, same as I had every Tuesday for the past 4 years. But my body, it remembered. A white sedan came to a screeching halt halfway through the crosswalk. The driver threw up his hands, mouthing something I didn't need to hear to understand. I stepped back, nodded, waved him through like I hadn't just relived the worst day of my life in under 3 seconds. It's been 17 years, but the sound still makes my bones freeze. I turned the corner and kept walking, my fingers curling around the strap of my tote bag until my knuckles paled. The past has a funny way of following you, not in grand, dramatic leaps, but in tiny, ordinary echoes. A sound, a smell, a stupid, screeching tire. I crossed under the shade of a jacaranda tree and let the memory in. I didn't invite it, but it was already there, clawing its way forward like it had been waiting for a gap in my day. I was 14. It was spring, and the air smelled like wet concrete and fresh-cut grass. I remember that because I was walking home from school, heavy with textbooks I wouldn't need after that day. My backpack thudded against my spine with each step. The light turned green, and I stepped off the curb like I'd done 1,000 times before. I didn't hear the car coming until it was too late. Just a shriek, rubber against pavement, and the crushing force that knocked the world sideways. They say your life flashes before your eyes. That's not what happened. What I saw was my mother. Corinne Lawley stood on the sidewalk, 20, maybe 25 feet away, close enough to see the panic or the guilt or even love. But I didn't see any of that. She didn't scream, didn't run. Her eyes locked on mine. 3 seconds, I counted, and then she looked away, tucked her chin, pulled the brim of her cap down like she was trying to disappear, and she walked off. No rush, no glance back. I laid there on the asphalt, leg twisted the wrong way, blood slipping into my eyelashes. I remember blinking furiously, trying to clear my vision because I thought maybe, just maybe, I saw wrong. Maybe she didn't see me. Maybe the sun hit her eyes. Maybe she was going to find help. But she never came back. Paramedics arrived 5 minutes later, but those 3 seconds, those 3 eternal seconds, burned deeper than any broken bone. I blacked out before they got me into the ambulance. When I woke up, the room was a shade too white, too clean, too still. My mouth was dry, and my leg was screaming. Painkillers dulled the edge, but the silence was sharper. No balloons, no familiar perfume, no anxious voice calling my name. There was a nurse, older, quiet. She checked my chart, adjusted something on the IV, and I asked her, hoarse, "Was anyone here?" She hesitated, pen hovering midair. "There was a woman," she said eventually, eyes flicking away from mine. Didn't stay long. A few hours later, I heard it again, from the family in the next bed, whispering like I wasn't just behind a curtain. "She's that girl. You know, the one whose mom left her in the street." That stuck harder than the metal rods they put in my leg. And yet, as lonely as those days were, someone showed up. Odessa Tillman. She lived 3 doors down from us. I'd only spoken to her in passing before, the occasional wave, the short exchange when I helped carry her groceries up the porch steps. But there she was, sitting at the foot of my bed with a Tupperware of homemade soup, chicken and rice, no words, no explanations, just soup and presence. She didn't ask what happened, didn't pry, she just stayed. She read her newspaper in silence, knitted something green and soft, and when the nurse came in to check my vitals, Odessa stepped outside like she belonged there. That night, I cried. Not from the pain, but from that realization. Love doesn't always come from the people who are supposed to give it. And sometimes, strangers do the job family won't. Over the next few weeks, Odessa became my constant. Corinne never returned, not once, but Odessa came every other day, and when I was discharged, she helped me get home, set up my room, and even brought a mini whiteboard to help me track my meds. I never asked her why she did it. She never explained, and maybe that was the point. 17 years later, lying in bed that night, I watched the shadows flicker across the ceiling of my apartment. The city outside hummed with late-night traffic, the occasional siren echoing in the distance, but my mind was stuck on 3 seconds. She saw me, she saw me, she saw me, and she walked away. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. Through the peephole, I saw her, leaning casually against the frame like she'd dropped by to borrow sugar. Her hair was streaked with gray, styled too perfectly for someone claiming to be just passing through. The scarf around her neck was the same deep wine color she wore the day she walked away. She didn't knock again. Just stood there, calm, like she had every right to be on my threshold. I waited. Maybe she'd get bored. Maybe she'd remember what she did and feel ashamed enough to leave. But Corinne Lawley didn't do shame. Eventually, I heard the soft rustle of paper sliding under my door. A pause. Then footsteps, heels tapping too slowly for someone in a hurry. I counted 5 seconds after the last click of her shoes before bending down to pick up what she'd left behind. A manila envelope. No name, no note. Just the seal, neat and deliberate. I opened it with more curiosity than caution, expecting, what? An apology? A letter filled with motherly regret? A photo of us from back when I still thought mom meant something more than biology? No. Inside was a document, legally formatted, stamped, highlighted. Affidavit of reconciliation. I scanned the first paragraph and stopped cold. Party A acknowledges that Party B, Corinne Lawley, has consistently maintained a maternal presence, demonstrated appropriate care, and wishes to restore their familial relationship in good faith. I almost laughed. Not a single mention of abandonment. No accountability, just a tidy piece of legal fiction. I left the envelope on the counter, made myself tea, and sat on the couch without turning on any lights. The hum of the fridge filled the quiet. The bitter taste of Earl Grey was the only thing grounding me. She wanted my signature. She wanted me to say, on paper for the record, that she had been a good mother. That her presence was steady, supportive, and real. It wasn't just about me. This was for something, a legal move, a setup. There was no attempt at a relationship, just a transaction, a signature to unlock something I didn't yet understand. The next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed with the envelope in my hands. The paper smelled like the floral lotion Corinne always wore. She'd probably dabbed some on her wrists before coming here, thinking the scent might soften me up. It didn't. I tossed the envelope back onto the dresser and stared out the window. Funny how silence works. For years, I'd imagined what I would say if I ever saw her again. I'd written speeches in my head, some angry, some calm, some righteous. But when it actually happened, when she was just a few inches and one wooden door away, I said nothing. Because her arrival wasn't about making things right. It was about control. I took the rest of the day off work, didn't call in, didn't explain. I just didn't show up. Instead, I dug out an old plastic bin from the closet. It was dusty and cracked along the edges, filled with things I didn't have the heart to throw away. Birthday cards, report cards, a photo of me in braces holding a participation ribbon, and the insurance form. It was creased, folded inside the back of a birthday card that read, "Love you always, Mom." The form was from the state, reimbursement for medical travel. Corinne had taken me to an eye appointment on my 16th birthday. I'd remembered that day as a rare moment of normalcy. She'd bought me lunch, smiled at me like we were actually okay for once. I used to think she was trying. But that form, filed the same day, stamped with her name, proved otherwise. It wasn't a birthday lunch. It was an errand, a way to claim mileage. I stared at the card again, the sloppy "love you always," now a punchline. That night, I sat in my kitchen and reread the affidavit. I traced the signature line with my fingertip and thought about what it would mean to sign, what I'd be erasing with one pen stroke. She wanted peace. That's what she said when she finally called. "I just want peace, Nia," she'd whispered into my voicemail. "We've both been through enough. Let's move on." Peace for who? For the woman who left her daughter in the street like an inconvenient errand gone wrong? Or for the woman who wanted her past scrubbed clean so she could gain something? I didn't call her back. Instead, I opened the top drawer of my desk and found the letters. Odessa's handwriting hadn't changed in the years I knew her. Sharp, clean, consistent. She'd left me a note after every holiday, every milestone. Some were short, others full pages. One of them, dated a few months before she passed, simply said, "Don't let ghosts wear human faces and call themselves family." I must have read that sentence 10 times before folding it up and placing it on my lap. Odessa never told me what she thought of Corinne, not directly, but in every act, in every quiet offering, she told me what love looked like, what it should look like. I spent the rest of the evening watching the sky change color, from soft orange to charcoal blue, until the streetlights buzzed on and the world outside dimmed. My phone lit up once. Corinne again. I let it ring. Later, I walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty, quiet. I leaned against the frame for a long minute, the envelope still in my hand. Then I called out, loud enough for the words to fill the space between us. "I'm not signing anything. Not yet." There was no reply, no footsteps, no echoes. But I knew she heard me. And this time, I wasn't the girl lying broken on the pavement. I was the woman standing on solid ground, demanding answers. The days that followed didn't scream danger. They whispered it. Corinne didn't pound on my door or leave dramatic voicemails. She didn't shout from street corners or make tearful phone calls to relatives. She was smarter than that, calculated, measured, and she had patience, the kind only guiltless people possess. I first noticed her the following Thursday. It had been a long day at work, back-to-back meetings, a report that wouldn't balance, and a tense conversation with a donor who thought nonprofit meant free labor. I walked out of the building around 6, tugging my cardigan tighter as the evening chill snuck in through the trees lining the sidewalk. And there she was, across the street, standing near the bus stop, holding a Trader Joe's bag like she'd just done some light grocery shopping, except it was nearly empty, and she wasn't looking at the schedule or her phone. She was looking at me. Her face didn't flinch when our eyes met. No wave, no nod, not even a twitch of recognition. Just that stare. Steady, sharp. I stopped walking, pulled out my phone, and took a picture. Not obviously, but clear enough. She saw me do it. Her mouth curled up slightly, as if I'd just passed her a silent compliment. I didn't confront her. I just walked away, heart pounding. That night, I logged the time and location in a folder I'd created on my laptop. I wasn't ready to admit it was stalking, not yet, but I was tired of trusting my memory alone, tired of second-guessing what I knew was real. The following week, it happened again. This time, I was coming out of the grocery store, arms full of paper bags, when I saw her near the magazine rack by the pharmacy counter. Different outfit, same scarf, same lipstick shade I remembered from childhood, a burnt orange that looked like rust in the wrong light. She wasn't shopping. She wasn't even pretending. She picked up a tabloid, flipped a page, and stared at me over the edge. I didn't break stride. I didn't speak. But inside, I started to build a wall, a fortress made of receipts, timestamps, photos, and facts. Odessa's voice echoed in my memory that night while I replayed the footage from my doorbell cam. She used to say, "Predators don't growl, baby. They smile." She was right. The third encounter came not in person, but in a padded envelope. It arrived at work, tucked neatly among donation letters and board updates. My name was written in cursive across the front, the kind that looked sweet if you didn't know better. Inside, a bouquet of artificial roses, silk petals dyed too bright to be real, and a folded card. The handwriting was the same. "You've always been the strong one. I'm so proud of you. Please sign the paper. Let's move forward, or I'll have no choice." That line, I read it 3 times, hoping it would change by the 4th. But it didn't. I showed the note to Esther, my colleague 2 desks over. She frowned, reread it, then looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes. "She mailed this here? To the office?" I nodded. "That's creepy," she muttered. "You should tell HR, or the police, or both." I didn't do either. Not yet, because technically, Corinne hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't threatened to hurt me, not directly. She hadn't trespassed, not in any way the law would care about, but something had shifted. This wasn't a plea. It was pressure, soft and deliberate. I went home that evening and installed a second camera, this one angled toward the stairwell. I updated the firmware on my doorbell cam and changed the settings so it would alert me if anything moved within 10 feet of my door. Then I started a journal, digital, password protected. I wrote down every detail, date, time, location, description, emotional state, and whether or not there were witnesses. It wasn't for therapy, it was for proof. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. Not to file anything yet, just to get ahead of whatever was coming. The woman I met with was smart, sharp, and wasted no time. "This isn't about protecting yourself anymore," she told me, flipping through the images and notes I'd printed. "It's about building a case. Don't engage. Don't reply. Just collect." I nodded. "What if she escalates?" "She will," she said without blinking. "People like her always do. Just make sure you're ready when she does." I was. The following Friday, I got home later than usual. Traffic had crawled for nearly an hour due to a wreck on the 215. It was dark when I pulled into the parking garage beneath my apartment. The air was still, almost too still for a building with 37 units. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. No real reason, just a gut feeling. When I reached my floor, I saw her. She was sitting on the steps just outside my unit, a paper grocery bag by her feet. She looked up like she'd been waiting all day, like this was a casual drop-by, not a violation. I didn't stop walking. "Corinne," I said, calm and low. "You can't be here." She stood, brushing off invisible lint from her coat. "I brought you dinner," she said, lifting the bag. "Chicken pot pie, the kind you used to love. You can't keep showing up like this." Her smile faltered. She stepped forward, slowly. "I gave birth to you," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Don't you dare treat me like a stranger." I didn't hesitate. You treated me like a stranger in the street, I said. That's where we began. That landed. She blinked, then clutched the paper bag a little tighter. All I'm asking for is your forgiveness. One signature. That's it. And we both get to move on. I stepped past her and unlocked my door, speaking without turning around. You already moved on 17 years ago when you pulled your cap down and walked away. I pushed the door open, but before I could step inside, her voice changed. It dropped into something colder, deeper. Sign it. I'm running out of patience. And once I do, you'll wish you had. I turned slowly. My phone was already recording from my coat pocket. Her tone, her words, everything was captured. I met her eyes and didn't blink. Tick, 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 I whispered. Then I closed the door behind me and double-locked it. That weekend, she called again. I didn't answer. The voicemail she left was clipped, polite, too polite. Just a quick visit, she said. Just 5 minutes. I'd really like you to see something. Her voice carried that tone, half sugar, half warning, like a trap wrapped in ribbon. I didn't respond right away, but something in me said, go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the part of me that still wanted to understand how a woman like Corinne could look at her own daughter on the pavement and keep walking. Sunday afternoon was warm, deceptively calm. I pulled into the street I used to bike down as a kid. The trees were taller now, older, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Her house, our old house, still had the same chipping paint, same flower bed out front that Odessa once helped me plant marigolds in. I rang the bell. She opened the door with that same manufactured smile, lips pulled tight over teeth she'd had whitened too many times. You came, she said, like she hadn't left 17 years of silence between us. 5 minutes, I reminded her, stepping inside. The air smelled like potpourri and lemon cleaner. Too clean, too staged. Everything looked smaller. The living room, the walls, even the ceiling. But it was the same couch, same rug, same coffee table I'd spilled juice on when I was 10. She gestured to the hallway. I updated the photo wall. I followed slowly, letting her lead, already knowing something was coming. And there it was, dead center in the hall, under a track light like it was sacred. The new family photo, same backdrop as the one we'd taken when I was 13. Fall leaves, matching sweaters, stiff smiles. Except in this one, I wasn't there. Same pose, same frame, same laugh frozen on Keen's face. But no trace of me. My spot was filled in with empty space. Cropped cleanly, surgically, I didn't say anything. She noticed. Corinne tilted her head slightly. It's just a cleaner image, she said. Less noise. Less noise. I took one last look at that photo and turned around. I didn't slam the door behind me, didn't speak, didn't ask why she thought I wouldn't notice. I just walked. Back in the car, my hands were steady, but my throat burned. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel, trying not to scream. Because I finally got it. I wasn't just ignored. I was erased, like I'd never existed. But ghosts remember. That evening, I got a call. Keen, my brother, same number, same voice I hadn't heard in years. Nia, he said, like we were still close, like nothing had happened. What do you want? I asked. She's trying, he said without hesitation. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I didn't respond right away. Keen, I said finally, did she ever tell you what happened the day of the accident? Silence. You were in college then, right? You remember the call? You remember what she said? More silence. I didn't press. I already knew the answer. If she told him anything, it was her version, polished, incomplete, convenient. She's your mother, he said eventually. She's not perfect, but she's trying. No, I replied. She's trying to rewrite the story. That's not the same. He sighed. You've always been difficult. And that was that. After the call, I opened my laptop and started organizing everything. Every photo, email, note, video clip, voice message. I created folders, labeled them, backed them up to the cloud, and a USB stick. I wasn't just collecting anymore. I was building something. A map, a history, a defense, a truth. I pulled out the manila envelope she'd left, the one with the legal form I'd nearly tossed in the trash. This time, I opened it. Really read it. Every word, every clause. Clause 7C. Party A agrees to refrain from any public or private statements that could be reasonably interpreted as defamatory to Party B. It wasn't about peace. It wasn't even about reconciliation. It was a muzzle, a gag order in the form of a signature. She didn't want my forgiveness. She wanted my silence. I stared at that line until it blurred, and then I slid the envelope into the shredder. The hum of the machine was almost soothing, like the sound of something old finally being destroyed, something that never should have existed in the first place. After that, I picked up my phone and hit record. My voice, clear and even, filled the room. My name is Nia Race. I am the daughter of Corinne Lawley. On October 12th, 17 years ago, I was struck by a car while crossing the street. My mother saw it happen. She looked at me, directly, and walked away. I paused, breathed, continued. This is my story, and I will not be erased. I left the cafe that morning feeling strangely calm. Not at peace. Peace requires honesty, but clear. Corinne's warning still echoed in my ears like static. Careful, Nia. You don't want to make me your enemy. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She already was. She just didn't like that I'd stopped playing the quiet daughter. It had started earlier that day when I opened the front door and nearly stepped on a small white box. No note, no name, just a lavender ribbon tied too tight around the corners. I picked it up, already knowing it wouldn't be innocent. Inside was a necklace. I recognized it instantly. It was a cheap silver locket, the kind you buy at drugstores for $9, shaped like a heart, tiny, worn. I hadn't seen it in over 20 years, but I remembered the weight of it around my neck like it was yesterday. I wore it almost every day in 5th grade, thinking it meant something. The note was stuck to the inside of the lid. Her handwriting, too neat to be casual, read, "See, I never stopped loving you." I sat on the floor in the kitchen and stared at it. For a while, I said nothing, just let the silence fill the room until it started to hurt. The memory came back not as a flash, but like a film reel rolling in the background of my mind. I remembered the day she gave me that necklace. I was 10. It was the day after a caseworker from Child Protective Services visited the house about a noise complaint from a neighbor. That same week, Corinne submitted a refund claim for a transportation stipend, gas mileage reimbursement for driving me to a free vision screening. I saw the paperwork years later, long after I stopped pretending it had been a birthday surprise. She didn't give me that necklace because she loved me. She gave it to remind the world she had. I put the locket back in the box and pushed it aside. That afternoon, I reopened the affidavit she had sent. I hadn't looked at it in over a week, but it was time to really read it, line by line, with the same kind of cold calculation she used to justify sending it. Clause 4. Party A acknowledges the consistent presence, support, and caregiving provided by Party B. Consistent presence. She hadn't called on my 16th birthday, or my high school graduation. She wasn't there when I got hit by that car. I bled in the street like roadkill while she walked away, adjusting her cap like I was some mess she didn't want to be seen cleaning up. This wasn't reconciliation, it was a rewrite. That evening, I sent her a text. Let's talk, tomorrow, Café Clementine, 9 a.m. The message was read instantly. No reply, but I knew she'd show, and she did. The cafe was half full, moms with strollers, older couples splitting muffins, a man in the corner with earbuds, and a dog curled at his feet. I picked a table near the front. Enough noise to hide a conversation, but not enough to cover one if it got ugly. Corinne arrived in a camel coat, hair done, lipstick darker than usual. She looked like she was walking into a job interview, or court. She didn't sit right away. She stood over the table and smiled that same polished smile she wore like armor. "I'm glad you came," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I didn't smile. Didn't offer small talk. Just reached into my coat pocket and placed the box with the necklace on the table between us. Her eyes flicked down to it. She didn't touch it. That was meant to be a peace offering, she said quietly. No, I said. It was a prop. She stiffened, but didn't argue. I didn't bring the document, I added. Corinne exhaled, long and dramatic. Nia, I know you're angry. I'm not angry, I interrupted. I'm done being erased. She looked around the cafe like someone might overhear, then leaned in slightly. You don't have to make this public. I'm not the one making this public, I said. You are. You're the one trying to clean your slate before someone else writes your story for you. Corinne's voice flattened. This is about closure. This is about control. She didn't deny it. So, I continued, keeping my tone steady, you want me to sign a document that says you were always there, that you supported me, that you were a loving mother. She nodded slowly. For family. For peace. No, I said. For $250,000. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is about money? It is about money, I said. Because if it wasn't, you wouldn't care if I signed anything. You wouldn't have sent a necklace with a sticky note pretending it was love. Corinne's lips pressed together. People change, Nia. No. People reveal themselves, I said. You revealed yourself a long time ago. I was just too young to name it. The table next to us had gone quiet. A woman 2 seats over was pretending to scroll her phone but kept glancing up. Corinne noticed too. She leaned in closer, voice barely above a whisper. You're making a scene. No, I said louder. You are. You're the one who wants me to lie, who wants the world to think you were something you never were. Nia, keep going, I said, sitting back in my chair. Let them hear what family means to you. Corinne's eyes flared. For the first time in years, I saw her without the mask, just a woman cornered by her own reflection. She grabbed her purse, then paused and looked up. Careful, Nia, she said, her voice low and cutting. You don't want to make me your enemy. I took the last sip of my coffee, stood up, and tucked my phone, still recording, back into my coat pocket. You did that 17 years ago, I said. I'm just now responding. I walked out, but before I reached the door, I turned around just once to see her sitting there, still holding the necklace box like it might explode. She had no idea that it already had. By the time I reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, I could feel the shift, not in the air, not in the people passing by, but inside me. It was subtle, like a thread finally snapping loose. I didn't realize I'd been holding that tension so long until I wasn't. That evening, I sat on my couch with a warm mug of tea, scrolling through emails on my phone. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just letting the day settle. Then one message caught my eye. It had been forwarded by a former coworker from my first nonprofit job. Subject line, FYI, local gossip thread. It wasn't curiosity that made me open it, it was instinct. And there it was, a post from a concerned community member on a neighborhood moms forum. Some of you may know my daughter, Nia. She's been spreading harmful lies about her upbringing in order to gain sympathy and manipulate public opinion. It's truly sad to see someone fabricate trauma when the truth is far less dramatic. Estranged children often rewrite history. No name attached to the account, but the phrasing was unmistakably Corinne's. I knew her cadence. I knew the way she weaponized civility. It was her version of a slap to the face, clean, composed, and just vague enough to avoid legal consequence. I read it twice, not because I was shocked, but because I wanted to absorb just how far she was willing to go to protect her fiction. And then the firestorm began. By morning, the post had been shared to 3 other local message boards. Another followed, quoting unnamed family sources about my supposed history of mental instability. One post even implied I'd threatened my mother in the past. The comments were a mix of pity and side eyes. She's always had issues. Some kids just can't let go. Sounds like someone needs therapy, not a podium. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I printed every single page, highlighted names, dates, phrasing. I bookmarked links, archived screenshots, cross-checked timestamps. At 3:14 p.m., I walked into my lawyer's office with a flash drive and a folder thick with paper. She skimmed the contents for 10 minutes, then leaned back in her chair, face unreadable. "This isn't defamation yet," she said. "But we're on the edge. Keep documenting everything." I nodded. "But you should also prepare for escalation," she added. "What does escalation look like?" I asked. Her reply was simple. "When public manipulation doesn't work, they'll make it personal." That didn't take long. The following Tuesday started like any other. Morning meeting, a lunch and learn with 2 new interns, a quick walk to the local coffee truck for a much-needed iced latte. At 2:07 p.m., a security guard knocked on my office door. "Miss Race, there's someone outside asking for you. Older woman. She said she's your mother. Said she doesn't feel well." I stood too fast. My window faced the street. I rushed to it, pulled the blinds open, and there she was. Corinne was sprawled on the ground at the base of our building's front steps, one hand clutching her chest, the other resting dramatically on her forehead. A paper bag tipped beside her with oranges rolling onto the pavement. Her coat slightly disheveled. Someone had already called 911. And then she looked up, just for a second, but long enough for me to catch it. She wasn't grimacing in pain. She wasn't panicking. She was checking her reflection in the storefront glass next to her, straightening her collar, adjusting her hair. And then, when she saw 2 people running toward her, she let her head fall back as if she were losing consciousness. I didn't go down there. I didn't call out. I didn't rush to her side. I recorded, through the window. Clear, steady footage, no edits, just truth. By 3:30, I had uploaded the clip anonymously to the same mom's forum where she had dragged my name. The caption was short: "This is what manipulation looks like." Within hours, her defenders began to retreat. Posts were deleted, threads locked. One of her old friends, a woman who once called me selfish for cutting ties, sent me a private message. "I didn't know," it read. "I'm sorry." It wasn't justice, but it was something. Corinne, of course, had her own version. She claimed she had a dizzy spell, that she came to see me because she was worried, that the oranges were a peace offering. She told that story to anyone who would listen. But the video did its job. I didn't reply to any of it. I didn't have to. The next morning, a text came from my lawyer. "We're past the line. Let's go beyond documentation. You're ready to file." I sat in my kitchen, that quiet hour between dawn and noise, and stared at those words. Ready. Not vengeful. Not even angry anymore. Just ready. I reached for my phone, opened my folder of footage, and dropped it into an encrypted drive. I changed into slacks and a soft blue blouse, pulled my hair back, and tucked the USB into my coat pocket. On the walk to the courthouse, I passed by a woman helping her mother out of a parked car. They were arguing about something, shoes, I think. The daughter rolled her eyes. The mother wagged her finger. But there was love there. Irritation, yes, but real love. I could see it in the way the daughter steadied her mother's elbow without thinking. It didn't hurt to see anymore. It used to. But now, it was just separate. I didn't come from that. But I would build something better. I reached the courthouse steps and paused. Took a deep breath. The USB in my pocket felt heavier than it was. "Let's make it official," I whispered, and I walked inside. I arrived 15 minutes early. Riverside Park was quiet that evening. Not empty. There were dog walkers, a couple of kids riding scooters down the path, but it was the kind of weekday hush that let you hear the wind rustle through trees. I chose the bench near the playground, not for the symbolism, but for the lighting. Good visibility. Clear sightlines, one entrance path. I wore jeans, a dark sweater, and a small crossbody bag. In that bag was a lapel mic, wired to my phone. The recorder app had been running since I left the house. Every step, every breath, documented. Odessa's friend, Dr. Meredith Hall, had agreed to meet here too. She wasn't a close friend, but she'd worked with Odessa at the clinic before they both retired. Meredith remembered the day of my accident. Not just remembered, she was there. She sat on a bench farther down, pretending to read a newspaper. Her white hair was pinned up. Sunglasses shaded her eyes. She looked harmless, observant, just like Odessa used to. At 6:08 p.m., Corinne appeared. She approached with that same purposeful walk I knew too well, measured, polished, as though the pavement beneath her feet belonged to her. She wore a navy blue trench coat, pearl earrings, and that expression she'd perfected. Warm, generous, performative. "Nia," she said brightly, "you look good. I always knew you'd turn out fine." I didn't answer. I didn't smile. I scooted over slightly so she could sit, but I didn't make it welcoming. "Let's skip the frosting," I said. "Why are we here?" She sighed as if I'd ruined a perfectly pleasant start. "I'm trying to fix things," she said, "but you're making it impossible." I let that hang in the air. She was baiting me. I knew the game, and I wasn't playing. Corinne reached into her purse and pulled out a new envelope, this one with an embossed gold seal. "This is just a clarification version," she said, placing it between us. "Cleaner language, simpler terms. We only need to show that we've reconnected. The rest is just words." I didn't touch the envelope. "What changed?" I asked. She blinked. "What do you mean? Why now? Why not 5 years ago? 10? Why is it so urgent?" She hesitated for the first time. "My mother passed 2 months ago," she said finally. "She left an estate. Some of it is locked. Conditional clauses, legal nonsense. They need proof I've reconciled with both of my children. I tried with Keen. He's on board." Of course he was. "And you need me to validate that fiction," I said. Corinne's smile faltered. "I just need you to say we're good," she said. "One signature, one lie. You're good at lying, aren't you?" I turned slowly toward her. "Is that how you remember the accident too?" Her face changed. "I was there," she snapped. "I wanted to help. But a nurse, someone, told me to back off. You don't remember, right? You were in shock." "I remember," I said. "I remember the color of your hat. I remember you pulling it down over your face and walking away." "I didn't walk away." Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. "That's not what happened. You've poisoned yourself with this story, convinced yourself I'm a monster. I was terrified, Nia. I didn't know what to do. I thought someone else had it under control." Dr. Meredith stood up then, calm, smooth. She walked toward us like someone stretching her legs, folding the newspaper neatly in her hand. Corinne noticed her before she spoke. "Actually," Meredith said, her voice even, "I was there. I was 10 feet behind you that day." Corinne's mouth opened, closed. "You looked her in the eye," Meredith continued, "and you turned around. You didn't run. You didn't scream. You looked around, pulled your hat lower, and walked the other way. I remember because I was the one who stayed until the ambulance came." I didn't need to look at Corinne's face to know it was unraveling. "That's the truth I'll be signing," I said quietly, meeting Meredith's eyes. Corinne stood up, fists clenched, lips trembling. "You set me up," she hissed. "No," I said, rising too. "I gave you a chance." 2 uniformed officers walked up the path, one male, one female. They'd been briefed, knew who to look for. "Corinne Lawley?" the female officer asked. "You're being served for violation of a restraining order and are under investigation for harassment." "This is a mistake," Corinne said, voice too loud. "She's manipulating everything. You don't know what she's capable of." I handed over a flash drive, voice recordings, footage, documents, copies of the affidavit, the smear campaign screenshots. "She's been warned," I said simply. Corinne tried to step back, but the male officer gently took her arm. "Please don't resist, ma'am." The park had gone quiet. A jogger slowed to watch. A woman walking her dog paused, earbuds out. And then the sound, click, of handcuffs sliding into place. "You'll regret this," Corinne screamed. I didn't flinch. I turned and walked. Meredith followed a few steps behind me. When we reached the end of the path, I paused. Just once. I didn't look back, but I said it anyway. "You taught me to survive," I said. "Just never thought it would be from you." The next morning, the sky over Riverside was soft gray, the kind that promised rain without fully committing. I sat on the bench by the library, Odessa's bench, the one near the rose bushes that always bloomed too early in spring. It had been 3 days since Corinne's arrest, and though the world had moved on, people commuting, sipping coffee, complaining about traffic, I sat still. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt emptied, like I had run a marathon barefoot and uphill. And now that it was done, I wasn't sure where to go next. The wooden slats beneath me creaked when I shifted. I pulled a small envelope from my coat pocket, the edges frayed from time. I wasn't planning to read it today, but something in the air, in the weight of quiet around me, told me it was time. Before I could open it, a voice broke my thoughts. "Excuse me, are you Nia Race?" I looked up. A young woman stood in front of me, no older than 25, holding a notepad and a phone. Her hair was in a messy bun, glasses slipping down her nose. "I'm Julia, from the Riverside Voice. I saw your name in the court log last week. What happened?" "Well, it struck me. Would you consider talking to me? Sharing your side?" I studied her for a moment. She didn't have the smugness of a gossip chaser. She looked nervous, too green to manipulate me, but also too eager for me to ignore. "I'm not interested in making this a spectacle," I said. She nodded quickly. "It's not that. Stories like yours matter, but only if they're told right." I didn't respond. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and handed her a sealed envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Something to read," I said. "That's the only version I want out there." She accepted it like it was made of glass, thanked me softly, then walked away. When she disappeared behind the hedges, I turned back to the other envelope, the one Odessa left behind. She'd tucked it into a baking tin after her diagnosis. I found it a few days after her funeral, hidden between her recipe cards and a coupon for cinnamon sticks she never used. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. "Naya, some people give you life, others give you reason to keep living it. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving. You've always been worth loving. You don't need to prove it anymore. When your voice shakes, speak anyway. When your hands tremble, write anyway. And when the world tells you to sit still, take one step forward, always." Oh, by the time I finished reading, I wasn't just crying. I was sobbing. Not the kind of tears that fall in private, neat, and quiet. These were deep, shaking, hiccuping sobs, the kind that make your ribs ache, that drag something out of you didn't know you were still carrying. It wasn't about Corinne, not anymore. It was about Odessa, about the woman who stepped in quietly when the one who should have stayed didn't. I stayed on that bench for over an hour. By the end of the week, Corinne's case had made the local news. A short segment on Channel 8. Restraining order leads to harassment charges in inheritance battle. They didn't say my name, but they didn't have to. People knew. The court documents were public. One neighbor left a basket of muffins on my porch with no note. Another crossed the street when I walked past. Some of Corinne's former friends vanished from social media, their silence louder than any apology. I didn't feel smug, or petty, or angry. This wasn't revenge, I told my therapist during our first session. It was self-rescue. She nodded like she understood more than I was saying. I didn't go to court for the final hearing. My lawyer went in my place. I already knew what the outcome would be. The evidence was clear, the truth even clearer. Instead, I spent that day at my office, surrounded by boxes of donated clothing and a group of volunteers sorting winter coats. Our nonprofit served women and children leaving abusive homes. It had always mattered to me, but now it pulsed through me like blood. Later that month, I reopened the draft I'd started writing years ago. My version, my story. I stopped halfway through the first paragraph, deleted it, and started fresh. Not for the courts, not for Corinne. For me. The words came slower now, but steadier. I wrote about the intersection, the 3 seconds, the silence that followed, and the sound of Odessa's footsteps, soft and certain, returning again and again until I could stand on my own. That night, I pulled out a photo album from my closet, the one with Odessa in the center, holding my hand at my college graduation. No biological ties, just the strongest bond I've ever known. I touched the corner of the photo gently, then closed the album. As I got ready for bed, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. Unknown number. I pressed play. Hi, Miss Race. This is Andrea from Valley Women's Shelter. One of our girls here heard you speak a few years ago. We were wondering, would you be willing to come talk again? The women here could use someone like you. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, letting the request settle. And then I smiled. Not because I needed to be heard, but because I finally had something worth saying. The sun was just beginning to set as I crossed the street at Belmont and Ridgeway. It wasn't the exact intersection from that day 17 years ago, but it mirrored it in enough ways to make my stomach pull tight. The faded crosswalk, the same kind of rust-colored leaves scattered along the curb. A little girl was holding her mother's hand as they stepped off the sidewalk, the mother gently tugging her back when a cyclist sped past without warning. It was a small moment, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it caught me. Froze me, just for a breath. I watched as the mother looked down, smiled at her daughter, and said something I couldn't hear. The girl giggled. They moved on, and so did I. That image, tender as it was, didn't hurt like it once would have. I let the feeling come, acknowledged the ache, and kept walking. The memory no longer controlled me. It was just a shadow, present, but not overwhelming. Back home, I placed my keys in the bowl near the door and kicked off my shoes. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Peaceful, not hollow. Later that night, I opened my laptop and scanned a few headlines. There it was, just beneath the fold. Local woman accepts plea deal in harassment case. The article was short and to the point. Community service, probation, a court-ordered public apology. Her name, now permanently attached to a searchable record. No mugshot, no jail time. But she didn't get what she wanted. Keene hadn't called. He probably wouldn't. I'd stopped expecting anything from him a long time ago. For someone so obsessed with keeping up appearances, his silence was just another calculated move. If you don't pick a side, you don't risk being on the wrong one. He'd always preferred the middle. I used to envy that. Now, I pitied it. The following weekend, I spoke at a local women's shelter. It wasn't a planned event. They'd reached out after hearing what had happened, asking if I'd be willing to speak about boundaries, family dynamics, anything that might resonate with the women they served. I didn't prepare notes. I didn't bring a speech. I just stood in front of 30 strangers and told the truth, not the legal version, not the polite version, the real one. I used to think blood meant loyalty, I said. I thought being born into someone's life guaranteed they'd stay in yours, that they'd protect you, even when it's inconvenient. But sometimes, the people who give you life don't know how to love you, and that's not your fault. No names, no specifics, but the truth hung in the room like mist. One woman in the front row wiped her eyes, another nodded slowly, both hands clutching her purse like a life raft. When I finished, no one clapped. There wasn't supposed to be applause, there was just silence, and in that silence, something sacred passed between us. Recognition. Relief. A quiet kind of courage. Several women came up afterward. Some just hugged me, others whispered their stories. Mothers who'd turned their backs, siblings who'd gaslit them for decades, spouses who called love a favor. They didn't ask me for solutions. They just needed to know they weren't alone. That night, I visited Odessa's grave. It was tucked in the corner of the cemetery, near a line of sycamore trees that always caught the wind just right. I brought a photo from the shelter event, me standing at the front, women listening, some nodding, others smiling through tears. I placed it against her headstone, weighted down with a smooth river stone. "We made it," I whispered. I knelt and pressed a sunflower into the soft earth. Her favorite. As I stood to leave, I noticed the silence around me. Not empty, but full. Full of every word Odessa ever said without saying it out loud. Full of every quiet act of love. The casseroles. The letters. The way she always showed up and never demanded anything in return. The next few days passed gently. I got back to my routine, work, grocery runs, folding laundry while the news played softly in the background. I started sleeping better. Not deeply, not without dreams, but better. Some nights I still hear the tires. That screech, the one from the moment before impact, it hasn't vanished. I don't expect it to. It's part of the architecture now, part of how I understand the world. But it doesn't paralyze me anymore. I let it come, I acknowledge it, and I move on. One afternoon, while walking through a vintage shop with a friend, I saw it. A gray baseball cap, nearly identical to the one Corinne wore the day she left me on that street. I picked it up, held it in my hands for a moment, the fabric soft and worn from time. I stared at it like it might speak, but it didn't. And I realized I didn't need it to. I set it back on the shelf. No dramatics, no tears. Just release. As we walked out of the shop, the air felt lighter. A breeze tugged at my jacket, playful. I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because something in me had shifted. I didn't need closure. I had freedom. You don't have to forgive someone to free yourself from them. Sometimes you just set the weight down and keep walking. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's survival. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth when everyone else tried to bury it. Not all wounds bleed. Some are silent, passed down like heirlooms, until someone chooses to break the cycle. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real, emotional, and unforgettable family stories.